Hello, this is Walter Bradley. We have a great guest, Dan, and I'm here with Greg Fernandez Jr., of course, and we're talking about 9/11, one of the most blanketed subjects right now in the United States. So I'm going to let Dan start out. He was starting something out with Greg and was bringing out some points. So, Dan, why don't you get us started?
Hello, my name is Dan Hennen, and I've done some, I have followed the 9/11 research here for a multiple number of years, and have gotten into the details. And being that today's the 17th anniversary of the attacks, you know, it's interesting to see people come out on Facebook and Twitter and comment on it, and those who try or attempt to tell the truth or to lay the breadcrumbs there to red pill some of the public, how they get met with various responses. I had a couple of interesting interchanges today on Facebook. Walter mentioned that he also had a couple, I think one for sure, that the woman ended up actually blocking him because of the tinfoil hat and this crazy conspiracy theories and things like that. And I had one person in particular says, "Fine, I have no problem with your conspiracy theories. Just give it a rest for one day. You know, please respect the families. Don't talk about that nonsense on 9/11. And then what you do in your spare time is up to you." So we get the same feedback over and over, like it's some kind of hobby or something we like to do on the side. When in fact we're actually trying to open up people's eyes and tell them the truth, that they are the ones that are being bamboozled and brainwashed. Such as, you know, myself, I was one of those years ago when all this first went down. I believed it all myself. So it's interesting getting into those scenarios. Another interesting call that I had today was someone in the truth community movement that had watched my recent interview with Robert Alexander. Robert Alexander is a new 9/11 witness that came face to face with some of the alleged hijackers in the months leading up to 9/11, and he tells a story in an 11-page affidavit that's a signed sworn jurat affidavit, and the tale is so, I don't want to say the word bizarre, but it's so outlandish that many just outright don't believe it. And so I remind people that he did take the sworn oath to sign that, and could go to jail if it's not true. So it is so bizarre. So his story comes from living in the San Diego area for many years, and that's where some of these hijackers were living. And I think it started January of 2000. You know, those months, all the way from January 2000 up to 2001, these hijackers were coming into the U.S. and were finding places to live, places to stay, places to work, and hang out. But a lot was in the San Diego area. And so this gentleman was in the Oceanside area, down by the military base, and his family owned a dry cleaning and military surplus store. And his story came about that he was talking to one of these Saudis that was in there all the time, and became friends with one of these back in 2000, and mentioned in passing at a party with this individual that they were watching the highlights of the World War II Japanese kamikaze planes flying into Pearl Harbor and whatnot on an old television broadcast, and the whole Pearl Harbor event. And Robert said, just in passing, he says, "Boy, imagine how horrible this scene would have been if they used, commercial airplanes fully loaded with jet fuel to do this damage. It really would have been bizarre." And so this was early 2000, and the Saudi looked at him. His eyes kind of blinked, and they switched topics, and he left the room. It's like, and so Robert didn't think anything really of it, but it really got this gentleman's attention, and this gentleman was not one of the hijackers, but a Saudi national living in a high-end, expensive resort outside of Oceanside at a I don't know if it was $5,000 or $6,000 a night type of a deal. Not there as a vacation, but living, actually living in this resort. Money was no issue, and so a very wealthy Saudi. So now we fast forward to, I think it was early 2001, in, I believe, April. In his store, 8 or 9 Saudi men come in, 2 dressed in suits, the rest in Saudi royal family kind of robes. And his friend from the resort came up and says, "This is my friend Robert, who was working there behind the counter." And he introduced him to a man. He said, "This is man's name is the Saudi prince and ambassador to the United States named Prince Bandar bin Sultan." And he says, "Robert, tell him about your story of using commercial flights as weapons loaded with fuel." And so Bandar proceeded to say he was excited, and he says, "I'll give you $100,000 for the idea. I'll give you $100,000, but not a penny more. Great idea." And all these other men came in and kind of circled around and stopped by the door, and he had a couple bodyguards and some other people by the counter. And Robert knew right then that something was up, and he says, I just knew this thing was, not just something we mentioned in passing, but someone had actually been talking about this and came up with an idea and actually wanted to pay me money for this. So he ordered the men out of the building. He didn't want to take a penny from these guys. He says, "Get out of here, because now you've crossed the line. You're talking, I mentioned something in passing. Now you're taking it to something serious, which is bordering, terrorism type of a deal. I don't want to be involved with anything to do with this." So he got out of there. But they all walked out. They all left. The man at the end was one of the bodyguards, stopped and stared at him with the grimace, a growl on his face. What did he say? A grimace, I guess. And they locked eyes. And he was just a Saudi individual. Didn't know him at the time. Didn't know what the connection was. It turned out later it was one of the hijackers, Al-Hazmi, from the San Diego location, who was meant or allegedly on that Pentagon crash. And so the men all leave. He didn't know what to think. He thought, boy, this is just a friend of mine we talked in passing over a year ago at some, at some party. And now he brings up this idea, and he brings in the Saudi prince to pay me off, whether it's for, he didn't know if it was for his silence or for the idea, to say I want the rights for the idea, or to shut him up. But he kept offering $100,000. So they all leave. They lock eyes with the last gentleman, and they all leave. A few seconds later, a white male Caucasian, American man comes in with a suit, like a Fed. A man in a suit came in and says, "What was that all about?" And so Robert, owner of the store, kind of told him what happened, what a bizarre thing it was. I told him this, they told me this, and I told him to get out of here. I don't know what the hell it was about. He said later he looked at images on the internet. This Fed with the suit that came in had a very distinct face about him. He looked him up later. He says, "That was John Brennan that came into my store a few minutes after this." Now, the backstory with Brennan was he was the CIA station chief in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and was very close to the Saudis. In fact, switched religions and became Muslim. Very close to the Saudis. So it stands to reason that this was him, although the story is so bizarre. This was in the year 2001. At the time, he still was the station chief. He later went on to become the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. But when he took his oath, and he was the one notorious for not taking the oath on the Bible, because he had switched, converted over to Muslim and got a new Muslim name. But John Brennan, very close to the Saudis, and was in San Diego and popped his head in the door, I think as a innocent bystander, just kind of wanting to get the gist of what happened. But he was feeling out the situation to see what happened with this owner, and he didn't think anything of it. So all this ends, and that was the last that this Robert thought of it. He just thought it was a bizarre situation. Well, it goes on that summer. His nephew's Little League baseball team in Oceanside does very well. They make it to the Little League World Series, and they all go to Williamsport, Pennsylvania. And so they invite this Robert Alexander, this person who owns the store, his wife and his children. So they take a flight out to Williamsport to watch his nephew play baseball in the Little League World Series. They win some games, they lose some games, and the event ends. Robert catches an early flight back because he's got to get back to his store. His wife and his two children take a flight the next day out of Williamsport. Williamsport, Pennsylvania is where the Little League World Series is, and the nearest airport is Harrisburg. And so he goes to the Harrisburg airport by himself, goes through security and goes on his way to his gate. Before he gets to security, actually, he's in the airport by himself. And this is August 25th of 2001. Now we're talking just weeks before the 9/11 alleged the attacks. He decides to go to the bathroom. No one's in there. It's a fairly large bathroom with some urinals and a bunch of stalls. He uses the very end stall in the men's room, all by himself. He's back there, door shut. Then he hears 5 or 6 guys come busting into the airport in an argument almost like a fight, speaking Middle Eastern language. And he believes because he was in the end stall that they thought that they were alone. They didn't see his feet down there at the stall way in the back. They were arguing about something, cursing, swearing, using language, and talking in Middle Eastern and very confrontational. Something was up, and he, at this time, felt endangered, is what he says. Now, I don't know what all that means, but the affidavit mentions all this, but he was carrying a knife at the time. Back then, knives were, I think, legal on flights up to a certain length, and he had one on him because he had a pretty wild lifestyle in the 80s and the 90s, and had been in many fights, and now had been clean and sober, and is now sober since I think the year 1990, but was used to situations like this, and he can handle himself pretty good. He says he thought to himself, I need to get out of here instead of just wait this out. I need to bust out and escape, because if they know that I'm in here, I could get beat up, roughed up, killed, who knows. And so he decides to take his knife out and make a run for it, and they were arguing almost right in front of his cell as they started talking. There were 5 Middle Eastern men down by his stall, down toward the end. He breaks out the door really fast, and the first guy that he sees, he hits him with the left hook, knocks him down. Next guy comes up. They're all scared. They're all nervous to see him because they weren't even acknowledging someone was in the bathroom, so they were startled. Hits the next guy and drops him. Now this is where the story starts getting unbelievable, where it kind of sounds like a James Bond story of the people that I've talked to, where they cannot quite believe this. But it is what it is. He said he knocked the 2 guys down, was on his way out the door. They all came after him, and one guy came at him. He took his knife out and did a swath right across in front of him, a horizontal line that cut him right on the skin on his abdomen, kind of, he calls it hip to hip. Kind of, just he was wearing his clothes, cut him. I don't know how deep, I don't know how severe it was, but made a cut. And on the way, as he reached back up, he did another slice upwards in his abdomen toward his shoulder blade, and basically it resembled an upside-down 7 is what he calls it. And this man, after he got out of the airport, he said, that's the same guy I saw at my store at the military surplus store in Oceanside, San Diego. Al-Hamzi, who was to be on the hijacking flight to the Pentagon. He cuts him. The other 2 attend to the dude. The other 2 are knocked out on the floor, and he hightails it to security. He goes through security. It wasn't anything like it is today. Wiped off a little bit of blood he had on him. Wiped off a little bit of the knife. Didn't call authorities. Didn't alert anybody. He just had a gut response feeling that something wasn't right and tried to sneak through. He saw the 2 other hijackers, allegedly Middle Eastern men, I should say, following him through the airport into security. He goes through security by himself. Remember, now his wife and his 2 children took a flight the next day, and the security says, "Oh, there's this knife here. Let me measure it. It might be too long to get through for security." Notices a little blood on it after he wiped it off. He says, "Yes, it's very sharp. I just cut myself a few minutes ago just putting it away." He goes, "Well, it's about close. It might be a little too long, but it's close enough, so go ahead." And so that's the other part that a lot of people say there's no way that would happen. But I think we're so ingrained with today's security where everything is, you're patted down, you're checked, everything is done. Back then, he says he didn't really give it a second thought. He let him go through. So he goes to the gate, waits. The 2 men following him were stopped at security, and he didn't see them again. So there's 2 men carrying this injured person through the Harrisburg airport to get medical attention, and I don't know if he needed to be stitched up or emergency, urgent care, or if he just needed some quick stitching. But he was cut. I don't know how deep. He gets on the flight. The other Saudis never follow him on. He doesn't know what the deal was. He was freaking out. He got on the flight, went home. Landed, and he thought, what am I going to do now? To tell my wife and kids about this event, or maybe just let it go? He said he was freaked out, so he let it go, and the next day his wife and kids came home, and everything seemed to be fine, but he didn't understand the whole connection to all this. He didn't piece together what happened and what all this was. So he put it in the back recesses of his mind and continued on with his life. Well, 2 weeks later, 9/11 comes up. The attacks hit the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, and they start flashing up these hijackers' pictures. And he notices the one, and he's like, "Well, this is very bizarre. Commercial airliners loaded with jet fuel, flying into buildings." And he says when he heard it, keep in mind now he was sober, and I think he's a born-again Christian. He dropped to his knees when 9/11 happened. He says, "Oh my God, I may be part of this in an unwitting way. I don't know how, but this just doesn't sit right with me." So they flash a number on the television screen, allegedly FBI or local law enforcement. If you have any information that could lead authorities to the 9/11, the bad guys, here's the number to call. And we think after talking with him, it was more than likely a CIA phone number to get in contact to help steer the narrative a certain way and try to get information rather than trying to get help because they wanted to sanitize the entire case. So he calls and says, "I got a story to tell about the individuals, of what had happened here." Now let me go back, and Greg, you probably remember this, but I think Walter, this will be new for you. But when he got back home, he waited 2 days, and then he did call. He went down to a payphone and called the San Diego FBI field office and wanted to speak to someone about this incident he had at the airport, because he knew then, even with surveillance not as good as it was, he had a feeling that the event coming out of the bathroom was captured on video surveillance, and they might in fact be looking for him because he essentially did the knifing. He might be under, someone might be looking to arrest him. So he wanted to come clean and say, "Look, I'm the bad guy. I'm the one who did this." Well, they didn't know anything about that. He called the first time and did it anonymous. The second time he called, he used his name and information, and I don't think they believed it. They didn't buy the whole story. So it kind of went nowhere. So 9/11 happens. He calls the number now, and now they say, "Let's meet. We want to know what the situation is." And he says, "I was the guy in the Harrisburg airport." And the very next day, I don't think it was the same afternoon, it was either the same afternoon or early the next day, he gets greeted by three agents, feds, in suits at his place of business in San Diego. One person to this day, he thinks is James Clapper. Now, looking back to James Clapper, what he was doing back in the day, he was working, he started off his career in the CIA. So who knows what he's doing in between their time, but he probably was an asset or some sort of agent all of these years, perhaps. But he says he also has a distinguishable face that you cannot forget. And he said, what's the story with the knifing? Is this the man that you knifed and held up an 8x10 glossy photo of a man all stitched up of Middle Eastern descent? And it had a knife wound of an upside-down 7 of this man's whose surgery or stitches or whatever it was. He showed him. He says, "Yes, that's the man that I knifed." And Clapper, or the feds, whoever was there, said, "Well, don't worry, we won't get in any trouble for this. You didn't do anything really wrong. These guys are essentially dead now because of the hijacking, so it's no big deal." And he says, "Well, but I met Prince Bandar in my store and started going on about that side of the story. That the prince, actually the ambassador to the United States from Saudi Arabia was in his store. Once he went down that avenue of Prince Bandar and the 8 or 9 Middle Eastern men, the Saudi connection, they came back and visited the next day and the next day and mentioned to this Robert, we don't want you bringing any of this stuff up. Let it go. Leave it alone. No one is ever going to buy your story. No one will ever believe you. So shut up. So he thought that was very odd. So that was the gist of it. He has since 2015. No one really took his story seriously when he started telling this story until a friend of his, a fishing buddy of his, came over for dinner back in 2015, early 2015, with a fishing buddy of him, and it said his buddy is a field agent, a special agent with the FBI field office, I believe, in San Diego. And so he told him over dinner the entire story. And so the agent believed him. He said, "You've got to get this out. This is some serious stuff. Get it off your back. You'll sleep better. Just get it out there." So he goes, "Here's the name of my manager, my superior. Call him. Get this whole thing out." So the next day he calls this gentleman and says, "I don't buy it. I don't believe it. But if you want to come in, write your bullshit story down on a piece of paper. Have at it." And right then, Robert Alexander thought to himself, "I don't think they believe me, or maybe this entire story is true and they don't want it to come out." So he thought the whole thing was fishy. So in the meantime, between 2015 and 2018 now, he's been trying to get on 60 Minutes, various news articles. Gloria already took the case to different lawyers, to different newspapers, magazines, TV. He's trying to get the case out, and no one will cover the story. 60 Minutes offered to have him on, and they talked, Robert says, 7 to 8 conversations on the phone to get this story, to set up time to do the story. And all of a sudden, on the 9th phone call, they said, "We're not going to do it, and we got to shut it down. We can't go further with the story." And he never heard back from them. So trying to get the story out, he sent a letter or something, information out there on the internet to the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Truth, the group that's doing the grand jury in the Southern District of New York State, to get the investigation of 9/11 opened back up and presented before a grand jury. Well, the president of that organization, the chairwoman, got the receipt of this information and says, "I'm too busy doing this stuff with my stuff, other things that I'm working on." She wanted to ask someone on the board to handle it, and so she asked Barbara Honegger. Barbara Honegger's on the board. Barbara's former Reagan White House policy analyst and 9/11 whistleblower investigator, and she wrote the book for October Surprise about the Iran hostage situation. She says, "Fine, sounds good. I'll call this Robert and vet out his story to see if it's true or not." And that's where we are today. She found out it's true. She helped him write up an affidavit. She said, "I want to take it to a court, take it to an actual justice of the court, get it signed by a notary, swear an oath, write up your 11-page deal." She helped him do the paperwork and make it all official and finalized, and it's out there now. And now Robert's doing interviews, but he says this is the first person who's actually taken the story seriously. So between Barbara and myself and Susan Lindauer, a former CIA asset, Robert's been getting some airtime, but not a lot. But that's the story. That's how it came about, and people either believe it or they don't. But they say it's a wild fairy tale and it's all made up. And I say, read the affidavit, decide for you want. I'm not going to shove any beliefs down anyone's throats, but the story seems legit to me. It's almost too wild to make up. And so Greg and I have covered the Philip Marshall case, and Philip Marshall was the former captain for United Airlines and did some CIA independent contract work along with Barry Seal, and has some CIA ties. But once 9/11 happened, he knew that the story didn't jive either, and he ended up writing 2 books called The Big Bamboozle and 9/11 The False Flag. And he wrote it from a pilot's perspective that these things could not have happened. The maneuvers in the air could not have happened. But once he started going after John Brennan himself and the Saudi connection and the Prince Bandar connection, it was then in January of 2013 that him and his 2 children and family dog were found with a single gunshot through their head in their Calaveras County, California home. And so they were all assassinated. They blamed it on Philip Marshall. Being crazy, being a conspiracy theorist. And and shooting the family dog, his children, and himself as part of an estranged divorce, messy breakup divorce with his wife, which also was not true. They were, in fact, working together. He was helping set up her brand new business. So this is the kind of connection that interested me from the... I followed a lot of the 28 pages and the Saudi connection and the Philip Marshall connection, and so has Barbara Honegger, and so she put me in contact with him, and we've been trying to get his story out. But Walter, as hearing this for the first time, what are your immediate thoughts on hearing a story like this here on the 17th anniversary?
Well, for me, the issue comes, I don't think that's a full picture, first of all.
Yep.
I think there are many more pieces to this. The Saudis being involved at that level, going down in that kind of entourage would be very rare, if not impossible, especially in the San Diego area. One of the things that is missing are the Bushes. The Bush family.
That's with Bandar, though, right?
Well, yes, they're very close with the Saudis. However, it doesn't deal factually with the other aspects of this case. I mean, it's an interesting story and probably has merit. If he swore to it, it could be true. But we always have to understand that even with an affidavit, with the threat of the nature of the consequences of lying in that type of situation might be a calculated risk. I don't say that story is wrong or is untrue, but it has some things in it that might be concerning to me, mainly having everybody there together, all telling him and offering Robert $100,000, as I understood, on this idea, if I understood that correctly. Is that correct, Dan?
Yes, I think either the idea to use the planes as weapons or the $100,000 to silence him and to keep his... the friend was possibly going to go home after all this before this happened, but I think he wanted to stay, but he wanted to keep Robert silenced, is how he...
I see. Payoff. And,
I think a payoff, yeah.
But the thing is,
right.
The Saudi prince would never personally do that, in my opinion. Not personally. That presents one aspect, because if you are a high delegate in the United States, and this is true with senators or anybody who's in high position, you don't personally go out and do anything. You give plausible deniability. And I think the Saudis are very wise in the way they do business, and I don't think they would have gone and done that directly, because that's a direct link to them. And, not that I disbelieve the story, maybe they did that. And he put it on affidavit and signed it, and they go to court with it. Okay. But the government, you see, there's some holes in that.
Do we know where? I mean, can people find this? Can people read what Robert Alexander said? Is it public or?
No, yeah, it's public. It's I've got it on my page on the www.uglytruth.info website, and I can put that out there as well. But I've got the PDF of it. I scanned it and have it as a 12-page. It's an 11-page affidavit, and the 12th page is the signed, sworn State of California information with the notary public. Now, so it is out there, and I have shared it, and it is available, and I've linked it on my various interviews that I've done with him for people to read on their own, whether they believe it or not. Now, would you think, Walter, if he's naming names like John Brennan and James Clapper, wouldn't that get him in more trouble faster by going that route? If it was not true, wouldn't he be slapped with a lawsuit or some kind of slander, libel situation, or wouldn't they even waste their time with a story like this?
First of all, if this affidavit filed in New York, it would get to Clapper. It would get to them. They would know about it. In my opinion, they would.
I'm sorry. Just to clarify, is the affidavit is signed in the state of California?
Right. Okay.
The New York grand jury that Barbara Honegger and the Lawyers Committee is filed in the Southern District of New York. That's the grand jury. That's a 57-page document relating only to 9/11 information.
Okay, but the thing that I'm saying, even if that affidavit was sworn in California and is turned in, that's a legal document, and it's actually.
Oh, really? Okay. Okay. Well, I'm not familiar with that. So if you can expand a little bit more on that, I'm not sure.
The fact is, it's an affidavit regarding a national security issue.
I see.
And in the military, and it wouldn't be a public thing to go out anywhere. You're dealing with government. It's high government when you're dealing with that. They could make that affidavit go away. Especially, and if it were true, that the Saudi prince was there. Do you know how much money the Saudis have invested in the United States? It's nearly $1 trillion.
Yeah, and they probably get a bunch of money from us too, right?
Yes, and the fact is, the Saudis, when it comes to that, the Bushes work with them. They're very familiar with them. And the issue being that it's just like George Bush going down there. Would he take an entourage and go, hey, we want you to, be quiet? No, they would not. Bush wouldn't do it. And that's what brings a high doubt and a high red flag to me, is the fact that he's saying that the Saudi delegate was there with an entourage. And I'm going, that, even with the affidavit, is highly susceptible to the fact that that's not how government works in the sense of high government. They don't go down there in an entourage and tell somebody, hey, here's some hush money. Shut up. That doesn't make sense to me. And, that's what you call highly senseless for a delegate. And we wouldn't do that.
Which sounds like Bandar. That does sound like something. It does sound like Bandar. And really, I think the key question is to really think about, was Bandar in San Diego during this time? Can we find any proof that Bandar was there during this time? I think that would help. That would really help a lot.
Because a document like this could be government-oriented also. It could be a way of misdirect, a rabbit hole.
Yeah, someone had mentioned just today, in fact, could it be a honeypot, this whole story?
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, after it was done, now when was this affidavit filed? What year?
August of, just this last month, August 6th of 2018.
Well, why was it filed then? When did this, it does sound, the timing and everything doesn't add up to me.
So I think, so just to do a quick overview, he's been trying to get the story out, but he doesn't know what the avenues or venues that he can do to do this. It was first when Barbara Honegger, with the legal background, says, I think you need to have some kind of a sworn affidavit, something signed to do this. And he says, okay, sounds good, I'll do it. So he helped write it up with her. He put together a 15-page document, and Barbara said that it was out of order, out of chronological order, not good grammar, a lot of misspelling. So she helped him clean it up to make it at least presentable, because he's not good with spelling and grammar. And so she says, you've got to make this at least public, you've got to make it at least official. And so this is the first person that he made it sound like even offered, here's a recourse for you to actually make it plausible. So that's the first time he did this, was in 2018, after this event happened in the year 2001, so 17 years later. Now, some also suspect the timing of this, how it just happened to be before 9/11, as another reason for the honeypot, as a misdirection.
And also a publicity thing. He might, I don't know this guy, and what's he get out of it? What is his direction? Because there's a motive for doing it. And I don't see, frankly, a good motive in this. I don't think it's an altruistic move.
I think that's yeah. Dan did. I mean, I'm sure you talked to him about this. Like, why is he doing this? Is he just a patriot? Does he love his country that much? I mean, he's gonna lose a lot. You know.
He said that he is I don't say at the end, but he's given up all. He's exhausted everything that he can do. His marriage has fallen apart. His two children that he had are both now just reached over the age of 18. When his youngest just turned 18 is when he told this FBI agent back in 2015, I think, so he kept it quiet for many years. But once his children now are adults and his marriage failed, and I think his business has since, I believe, folded, but I don't want to say anything to that effect. But he's like, you know what, bring it on. I don't care what can happen. I want to get this story exposed, and I don't care what the consequences are. That was more of my understanding of what he says, that he wants to get this out there at any cost.
Well, there's more behind this, I think, than just that. Not that I know, but I'm saying 17 years later, he comes up and makes this statement, then makes it an affidavit, gets it set up, and there's a lot of questions that he needs to answer in regards to that. And excuse me just one moment. I'll be right back. I've got some more thoughts, and I want to get something taken care of. Just one moment.
Okay.
And that, that Greg, as well, Robert's very open to doing interviews or answering questions one-on-one or in person or on YouTube or whatever. You know, he says, I've got nothing to hide. And so he's not like he's hiding behind some facade and trying to get this out there to make him some kind of high-profile celebrity out of all this. He knows he's facing some huge consequences, and in fact, his own life's probably in danger. But he says, "I'll answer any questions. I got nothing to hide. I'll tell anyone whatever they ask." So he's open to do all those things, which I think might be prudent as a next step for him, just to prove his authenticity, is to do some of those types of things.
Well, one of the things that come up to me is Brennan. He came after. That is something that interests me.
Me too.
What happened?
Highly.
And if it indeed happened that way, then I see a tie-in to what happened. And one other thing, a friend of mine who's Jewish and in a different direction, and I'm going to go with that and leave it as it is, but he said, if I remember what it was exactly, he said, is that they tested for the first time the satellite system for Blue Book. And I went, oh, I never heard or thought of that. Yeah, I thought about the hologram thing. And it was a test also, kind of like a mutual system to verify their satellite approximation and operation. And everybody said they saw a black aircraft and not an airline aircraft, which looks totally different. And that, when you said Brennan was there after this so-called entourage coming from Saudi Arabia, that made me think, well, that's a good, interesting cover story. He's CIA, or in FBI and in CIA. But the interesting thing that is there is that he got the details of that. And I don't say that was where the true inception came out, because typically this would be a military operation. And the military would be working the satellites. It would be the military satellites that would actually do, and they say blue beam is to do an alien invasion farce. I don't think that's what would be in view. I think it's more in view of these things, which we do see, is to give people a view of something that can substantiate a narrative that they want the people to believe, to achieve the objective that they are reaching for. In this case, it was bigger than just going to war with Iraq. There was something in Iraq that they were after. And there's something in Antarctica there's after. They don't have to worry about that, but if they need to go to Iraq and start taking and grabbing stuff, they have to be there, and there has to be a reason for the military to be there. if you see my point. These kinds of things are so much bigger and have so many different facets that it is scary sometimes. And that's why I want to bring up that point, and I hit on Brennan.
The other thing... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. But the point being is that there was all of these people from high government coming into this one little shop and going, hello. And frankly, I didn't see a justification even to do that. If I was in a position and that, I would just leave it alone. You know, no.
But they knew him, right? Or at least one of them knew this guy, and really,
he's pretty good.
Brennan wasn't that high at the time.
Brennan was, I think, still the station chief back then. He was pretty high up, but not the director. But this friend of his, this Haji, or I'm not sure what the actual name. It's in the thing. He was a good friend with him in the '80s while Robert was going through his partying days with this Saudi man who had unlimited funds and who was fun to hang around. He was there from the 80s and 90s and 2000 when all this took place, living at a high-end resort, actually living there, but always interested in the local military surroundings there at the military base. And so when he got together with him, they always talked military stuff. He came in and talked at the military surplus store. They went out and did things military, so he thinks that he was a Saudi intelligence agent collecting information there. And that was actually his job, and that was his role. And so when he got this, he was able to shoot it up the ladder and push it up the flagpole. And now we know that the planes didn't go into the buildings as the narrative. So regardless of the story's true or not, it made it sound like it ties in with the official narrative of using planes as weapons. But it was very interesting. Now the Philip Marshall connection, when he was before he retired, he had a West Coast flight track when he was working with United as a captain of the 7. He was a captain, and his flight was up and down the West Coast for several months before he retired. And so he was living in California. His route was San Diego up to, I think, Washington or Seattle and back. And he said he always saw, and Greg, you might remember this story. I got to find it in his book, but he said he found it strange in the year 2000 and 2001 that he always saw the Prince Bandar's airplane on the tarmac, on a different tarmac at the San Diego airport. Why was the Prince Bandar's plane, his personal plane, which is a big, I think it's an Airbus 340, he saw it continuously on a back tarmac at the San Diego, I repeat, San Diego airport. So wow. Philip Marshall saw that himself many times. So that places Bandar there, assuming that the information is correct. But we know the Saudis, that group, that small contingent, were certainly in San Diego because they were the ones at the mosques and getting jobs, I think, as there were imams at the mosques there in the San Diego area, and that's where the two hijackers ended up needing a place to stay and got hooked up with the FBI informant who was on the lookout for terror watch list people. That's where they ended up staying and providing them houses and apartments and utilities and getting them groceries and whatnot. That's how all this ties in, because they ended up staying with an FBI informant in San Diego. So the whole thing is completely, utterly bizarre, but I think safe to say Bandar was in San Diego an awful lot back in those days.
Now, can we look into if Brennan was in San Diego around then?
Yeah, I don't know about that because he was busy as a station chief in Saudi Arabia. I don't think he was in the U.S. all that much anyway in those years. He was in Saudi Arabia. Now, who's to say that, where he was not all the time, but I think the majority of his time was there. And he was concocting all those black ops, I think, back then, those operations in Saudi Arabia.
Yes, that would tend to be what it would be, is that he would be, an operational chief doesn't wander off to San Diego. And
no, he doesn't wander off for sure.
and the thing about, over something as small as that, and again, the Saudi entourage, I met a Saudi prince, same type of guy. And I'd like to see a picture of this Saudi, because I talked to him in he brought, how I got into it with this Saudi prince was he told me he was a Saudi prince, and I was talking to some believers, and he looked over at me because I profess following Judaism and the Jewish Bible and everything. And he said, "Oh, we're brothers." I went, "Oh," and I'm very curious because he was in the Bay Area, and and I talked to him in a coffee shop there in Castro Valley, actually. So
yeah, I've seen a lot.
So the two hotspots in California in this timing was Los Angeles and San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
That's all the hubbub. The 28 pages are about of the California contingent was taking place on those two locations. Now they also left to do partying and whatnot in Las Vegas, but they weren't part of that crowd in Venice, Florida. I don't think as well. At Huffman Aviation taking allegedly flying lessons with Mohammed Atta. Now, the other thing that I was remiss in my story that Robert Alexander said, and Robert, I mean, I'm sure that this may really top the story altogether. When Robert says he confronted the 5 men in the airport in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, he identified one of the bigger guys as Mohammed Atta himself. And he thinks they may have been at the Harrisburg airport for a dry run or something. He said there was 5 of them. And we know that in the alleged Patsy scheme, each plane had 5 hijackers assigned. A couple muscle guys, a couple pilot and a co-pilot, and what else? One of those only had 4 because, what's his name, Zacharias Moussaoui never made it after being arrested in Minneapolis. But they all had groups of 5, and he said there was 5 of them in the airport all arguing as if they were stressed out about something. And he thought maybe there was going to be a dry run or something at that airport. But he identified Mohammed Atta. So there's another name. And that's really what the thing that throws the non-believers of this story says, you know what, I can't take it. I can't take it anymore. It's too wild.
Well,
it's wild. It's really wild.
Here's the
Hollywood.
Other thing. A knife attack in an airport wouldn't go unreported. Somebody that's bloodied, and the guy saying, how did this happen? Well, I stabbed myself. The police in airports are not too light in areas where there's a knife-wielding individual, and then he goes through security and he's got blood on the knife, and they've got some individual in the airport. That doesn't tie in well either.
Correct.
This is back in the 90s.
But I'm talking about you've had an attack.
But it was in
somebody carried into a station to be stitched up. How did this happen? And it seems very disturbing.
Same way it happened to Jim Garrison,
who was
the Harrisburg
investigating
JFK.
Of that. They should.
And Robert thinks that there is surveillance out there because that's how they identified. They couldn't see clearly who the assailant was, which is really a Robert Alexander, according to his story. That they were out looking for them and they didn't know where and who he even was. So when he came and identified himself, that's why they jumped on him the very next day and said they wanted to get the story straight. Now, what Robert is doing, in addition to having his life in danger and losing everything for this cause, allegedly, is that he says he's only asking for 2 things. Number 1, all phone calls to the FBI field offices are recorded and saved. He says, play mine from the date that I called, from the not the payphone, but when I talked to the FBI agent, and even those calls, I think, from the payphone. All those should have been recorded when he was acknowledging the situation back in August of 2000. So he goes, that they have, and he goes, I got a feeling that surveillance video footage from the airport attack, where it spilled out into the out of the bathroom. The attack itself wouldn't have been captured in the bathroom, but spilling out and carrying the individual off, he said he should have been clearly identified there, along with the 2 men carrying the other injured person off. He said it looked like an injured football player being taken off the field, carrying him off.
Plus, Robert's attack, though, seems ill-advised. I know they were coming in argumentative, and I'd been in a situation like that in airports when I was in the military, and where people come in and and I've run into a few Muslims and a few that are particularly loud and aggressive talkers. But the point being, the attack seems questionable, even in my opinion, because of the fact that, okay, loud people come in. You don't hit and attack people coming out because they are not, the direct threat and need of force didn't seem to be there.
Right. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And others have said that as well. They said, what deemed you as a, how did you conceive that as a threat? Why do you think your life was in danger just because you're sitting in the bathroom stall? And he claims that he knew the situation. It raised his antenna, and he knew it was not going to end well. So he figured his life was in danger.
Okay, that seems subjective, though, because I could think I'm in danger when I'm not.
Correct.
Based on my feelings and thoughts. And then I would not attack somebody based on that.
That was my first question to Robert when I had him offline when I talked to him. I said, what made you think that your life was in danger? I never would have done that myself in that situation.
That makes no sense.
And started punching people.
And there's 5 of them. You're not going to get out alive if you're attacking one of their brothers there.
And the other question that someone else asked was it a setup? Do you think they went in there when they knew no one was in there on purpose just because you were the only one in there to do exactly just that and become loud and boisterous?
That's what I was thinking.
On purpose to take him out. And he says he does not believe that was the case. He thinks it was a random.
I agree with that.
A random thing. But what's the odds? The coincidences of all this stuff happening, it's almost too wild to make up, or it indeed is a honeypot situation.
I believe more in that right now, because when you have too many links that are not connected, guess what? It's kind of like, well, then they're not connected. But it's an interesting story.
It is.
But it doesn't have any weight of evidence to keep it whole in the sequence, and what he's saying doesn't bear any evidence, in my opinion, unless somebody see, because somebody could fake somebody out to create a circumstance. For example, somebody could be presenting himself as the Saudi prince and could present themselves in a very authoritative and a real way.
Correct.
And try to elicit this type of thing for a purpose of bringing in an angle that could be disputed, in a sense.
Correct.
And this is not unusual. This is not new. This has happened before in different circumstances. You could go back to World War II and many other times, and even in recent history, these things are occurred to give the impression of, to get a desired effect. And it is a leading in a direction which I totally disagree with, is that these were the ones that brought about this situation. And as I go back to Shaul Dog, a friend of mine, a Jewish, he goes, hey, that was a test. They used satellite holographic imagery testing that. And as you notice, after that event, strange things have been noticed more so in different places in the world, based that they think, and I'm not putting any standard of, yes, it's happened, but that after that, there's more of this cities in the clouds, of things that they see, jets that are not there that vanish as they're flying, and poof, they're gone. And people say those are alien craft. No, they're not. There's no such thing as aliens. But they're giving this impression and conditioning through these things and reports and through the truth movement. They bring these things to be a sidetrack, to be a little bit of a, it might be to get people confused and go, wait. And this kind of thing I'm always on guard for, because it's not something that I take lightly that somebody filed an affidavit on, but I always go to, what are the facts? What are they saying? Why are they saying it? And there's a lot of breaks in this story that indicate that it can't have the continuity that supports truth, in my opinion.
Well, I do wonder, too, what I'm very curious is about how all this plays out. if we can get a response from our government, from our feds, from somebody, that's what I'm going to be focusing on here, is how is the response from the government to what this guy is saying. I just want to make one more thing. Dan, you were talking about Prince Bandar in Saudi Arabia. You can find that on page 35 of Philip Marshall's book, False Flag 911.
Oh, really? Okay. What's on that page? Can you clarify?
Yeah. So that's where it looks like Prince Bandar. That's where it talks about him being in San Diego parked, where where you're talking about. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. That's because I didn't want to say that without having evidential proof, but that's true. That's really what piqued Philip Marshall's mind about this whole thing, because he knew something was up between the Bushes and Bandar. Bandar bin Sultan, the prince, the Saudi prince, actually became such good friends with the Bush family. And this is for the listeners. I think we're all aware of this, but his name is actually Bandar Bush when they get together, and that was the one. They were smoking cigars on the White House lawn September 12th of 2002 after the World Trade Center attacks. Is that who George Bush was smoking cigars with on that balcony?
That could be true.
Yeah.
And so the other thing, Greg, on my video that I did with him, I had a running collage of images of various Prince Bandar images of where he's been and who he's been with and shaking hands with through the decades. I mean, he goes way back with all sorts of high-profile people, and he is someone, like Greg, you mentioned earlier, that seems to be cavalier enough that this certainly could have happened. You wouldn't think a normal Saudi prince would do this, but Bandar is so different, so off the hook, that it almost, in my mind, could be actually plausible, although it is very unbelievable.
Well, one of the things that I will come back in again, being in that I've run across those, for example, the Saudi prince in Castro Valley. I remember telling people about him, going, why did he talk to me? What was his purpose? And I don't know. He was trying to get a connection going. And the thing is, when you're a Saudi prince, yes, you're going to have bodyguards. You're going to be secure in everywhere you go. But you will not tie yourself to doing anything that can, in this case, bring a criminal element, so to speak, into it. Now, of course, as a Saudi diplomat, there are certain exclusions. As a diplomat, he's immune to prosecution in a lot of things. And what would happen is, if this were true, it would be a expulsion from the embassy and could not represent his Saudi government, and it would be no big deal in the sense from that perspective of the Saudis. What were you doing that for? But the issue is they like to take the Saudis as the ones that were behind this, and there are more options also involved.
Well, they also blame Jews. It's always Jews, Saudis. Those are the two big ones.
Saudis, and everybody, because it's easy.
Or Bush, yeah.
And it's easy to do that. It really is. When you get that, it's the Saudis, it's the Muslims, it's them. That's it.
It's got to be a lot of them. It can't just be one group. It's on so many levels. So many people had to be involved just in the cover-up. Even if these 19 people did it and Osama bin Laden, blah blah. Even then, why would our government? Why would everybody cover up all of these things? Cover up Building 7? It does not make sense.
It takes a lot to do that too. Not just Saudis and a good Mossad, as they were talking about, and the Jews, and I thought, wow, no, this takes somebody
who are but they are all involved. I mean, the people that saying that aren't wrong. There's so much proof that so many different groups, so many different people were involved in this, and this Bandar is just, his hands are all over this thing. just in a very public way. I mean, because I was looking him up, saying, okay, well, what has he done since then? And he served as the Secretary General for the National Security Council from 2005 until 2015, right before Obama left. I mean, I don't know. It's just this whole thing is just, yeah, it's really deep. It's multi-layered. Right.
We're not going to be able to get all the details in that. It's just like the Kennedy assassination. It's exactly the same thing. A major
and there were people paid off the same way that this Robert Alexander is claiming that he was paid off. And I'm not saying that I believe it either or. I would never say that somebody's lying unless I could prove it or something like that. I'm very curious to see how this all plays out.
It is interesting, and it will be kind of a real lesson to watch what happens when you make some type of confrontational deposition in which you put something down to affidavit, making something like this public. And it's either I'm not going to call it a false flag operation, I don't know, but it smells like one to me. And I don't know if you agree, Greg, but, I heard once in the military, facts can be created. And that's always stuck with me. Facts can be created and be true and be real, but signify nothing. But it gives the impression. It's called circumstantial. And I believe I'm looking at that right now in this. Don't know. Not declaring, because this is the first I've heard of it. But it does bring skepticism based on how the information is and based on Robert's testimony of, and, when somebody tells a tall tale, you've got to make it real. And he's doing a good job of trying to make this real. I agree with that.
Well, the other thing is, Dan, maybe you can also give us a little view on how Barbara Honegger, she's taken this seriously. Do we know, or is she taking it seriously, or is she just trying to help this guy get his story told?
Well, I think that the number of hours she spent with him getting the story down on paper in chronological order, and to make it presentable, and coming from an educated person, which he does not write that way, she wanted to make it. She helped him a lot to get it presented in a professional way and take the right necessary steps. I think that she does believe or buy the story, but she's more helping him out, I think, and trying to get him, get this story out there. Now, I was asked today, did I think it through before I did the interviews? And I said, well, whether I believe it or not, I took the calculated risk to have him on a couple shows to get his story out, regardless if it's a limited hangout or not, because there's not much that's going to harm me by getting the story out, unless I'm discredited for pushing this guy's angle. And I said, I'm fine with that, whatever. But what's the biggest, Walter, what do you see was the downfall for those of us helping him here? Just discredit campaign, or what could hurt by pushing his story, whether we believe it or not, just by giving him the
well, I don't believe in silencing anybody. I'm not a censor. And if he wants to put his story out there, and it could be a little touch of this, and this is something I say, what if Bandar and others hired him to do it? Seems implausible, doesn't it? But what if, like I say, this is a creation fact, in which they go back to Bandar and say, hey, look at this. And he goes, and then what if he confirms it? Well, yes, I was there. And yes, that was what I did. Not that that's likely to happen. I don't think it will. And I think really what this is going to be a rabbit hole that ends in a dead end.
Correct.
In my opinion. Because I see nothing of merit at this point from my perspective on what I've heard, that I go, wait, this doesn't add up, this is not clicking, this doesn't mix, and there's too many variables that, when something is true, all the stones fall in place. In this case, they're falling out of place. They're not holding. And not that I say he's lying, because strange things can happen. But facts stand. And if there are no facts, or if it is a created thing, it has a very sand base that is quickly able to be discerned, and then it falls. I'm not convinced of this one at all. And it would be hard to convince me unless there are corroborating facts that would confirm his story. See, because every story needs the fact and a corroboration that comes from that which substantiates it. That's what investigation and research is about. And right now, I don't see it.
Okay. Let's move on.
Sure.
Dan, I don't know. Have we ever talked about 911 really deeply? I don't really remember us really getting.
I don't think so. I think we touched on it, but
because I'm very curious. Very curious. And really, when I heard you say that when you first saw those twin towers, when you saw everything happen on 911, you believed the whole story, which I did too. Can you kind of maybe give us a little view of what your thoughts were on that day, and then what changed your mind?
Well, I was heavily impacted. I was married with two small children at the time, and I was dropping off my daughter at daycare on the way to work when that whole thing happened. And then I got to work, and no one really did much of anything except watch the TV that day. It had a very strong and profound impact on me as a person, watching all of this stuff happen. Now, at the same time, looking back on it, things didn't make sense. The Shanksville crash site never sat well with me. And President Bush sitting reading a book to my pet goat after being told the towers were struck, and him finishing the story, I knew something didn't sit well with me over the course of the next few years. But I was one who did a lot of research and looked into it. But everything I read was the official Operation Mockingbird stories, the propaganda. The United 93 flight with the heroic flight. And, we had a lot of Minnesota connections as well. That Tom Burnett, who took charge of that flight, the football player, along with the rugby guy who decided to storm the cockpit, that whole fallacy, which we now know that never took place at all, that was a Minnesota football player here from a few miles away. That was a standout football player. I mean, that was a Minnesota connection. The Colleen Rowley, Zacharias Moussaoui was a Minnesota connection that took place right here. Colleen Rowley was named Time Magazine Person of the Year along with two other whistleblowers that next spring. And so Minnesota had a lot of connections to 9/11. So I followed it from that perspective. But it wasn't until I got into following the movies and videos on YouTube that got me to the real truth of what was going on, and onto the different deep site forums and pages dedicated to 9/11 truth that really started getting it. And then that's when things didn't add up for me, and I started peeling back all the layers of the onion. And that was probably 2010, 2011 for me. And but for me, it was getting punched in the gut, knowing that the entire thing was a lie. And I just thought that United Flight 93 was also a fake thing, and I found out later that someone who came forward and spoke to me anonymously said that they lived in the area, and there was debris in the trees by Indian Lake. There were seats and luggage in the fields and the small town there outside of Shanksville, where a plane was shot down. There was FBI agents there collecting photographs, and any video and camera that you took videotape of that crash landing. They came and said, you need to be a good patriotic person and turn over everything you've got so we can find who did this and we can solve it. And so they collected everything. And so that's how people have been just bamboozled by this entire case, where nothing is true, where we find out today that there was no hijackings of not one plane, but there was no hijackings at all that day. And so that led me to the whole, Philip Marshall case, to the Saudis, to Huffman Aviation, to Venice, to Daniel Hopsicker's investigation onto those people with Muhammad Atta and the connections with all these people. And it really gets into where I'm of a belief that the Saudis were hardly ever any involved at all, other than a funding perspective, perhaps. But I don't think the Saudis, other than being patsies, had anything to do with this entire scenario at all.
I agree.
Israeli Mossad, probably, U.S. government probably, the military probably, the deep state probably, all these people had a hand, but I don't think the Saudis had anything to do with 9/11 on those events other than being patsies. But I do believe, and I firmly believe, that they were involved in the U.S. in some sort of operation here on American soil doing something. They weren't here taking flight training classes. They were doing something at Huffman Aviation. And Muhammad Atta and these guys already, many of them, were established very good pilots before they even got here.
And I think Huffman was tied to the CIA also, though.
And I think that there was, whether they were flying flights back and forth from Venezuela with drugs or weapons or guns or cash or something, I think that was the cover, was what they were doing there in Huffman. They just blamed it on these idiots who were taking flight lessons, that they didn't know how to fly a plane. But Muhammad Atta was in the Egyptian Air Force as a pilot. I mean, he was a very good pilot. His friend Wolfgang Boeringer was a pilot. Wolfgang Boeringer. These guys were very high up in the Central Intelligence and in intelligence circles, all together. And the big key there is that all 19 of these guys, even 20 when you think of Moussaoui, were being funded, shepherded around, and never got busted or in trouble while their entire stay in the U.S. They never got in trouble. Their court cases were thrown out. Their speeding tickets were tossed aside. They never got fines. They were partying and going out with hookers and cocaine, and they never got in trouble. So they were here under someone's direction high up, and I'm thinking that's the CIA.
And that makes sense. Immunity and how they got to travel, and they were on a watch for terrorists.
Yep, and they were able to move about freely wherever they could do anything they wanted. So they were under the watchful eye of something. But I think some have also said that these 19 people could have been trained assassins and working as assassins for the CIA, and now that they're conveniently dead after the events of 9/11, there's plausible deniability. If anyone ever later went to say that person was on some hit team, they'd say, "You're out of your head. That person's dead." None of these people died on 9/11, so what more of a perfect angle would you have to use these operatives, these deep ops operatives, than to already have them be dead and not have them be dead? It's genius.
It's creating rabbit holes for people to chase where it goes nowhere. When you create something that is not, I used to hear that in the military. Let's create something that's not, and they do that well, and that's why when I saw the buildings fall, I thought that's not normal. A plane hitting a building doesn't take the whole thing down, and a fire can't do that. Weaken the structure that the whole thing fall apart, because that's the grade A structural steel. It melts at a much higher temperature than a plane blowing up and spreading a little fuel can do, and that a fire can produce from all the internal elements from wood or paper could produce. It would take something much greater to do that. And I was in shock going, okay, they're saying that the planes did that, but that doesn't cause a free fall. And a fire at one building that was built of structural steel in some other country burned for 24, 30-something hours and did nothing. Of course, it didn't have a high impact, and they say, there was no impact. However, like I say, those trade towers were built to withstand that. And
I think they were built to withstand the impact of two airplane impacts, I think.
Yeah, and right. Well, even with 2 or 3 impacts, they were designed to absorb that and remain structurally sound, even though the outer shell would be totally decimated and everything inside would be taken out. But as far as that being a collapsing single drop straight down at free fall speed, no. That could not happen unless it was a controlled demolition, because nothing that's melting and bending, if it would have melted the upper structure, the physics of that, of it really happening, would have having the top topple off. It could not bring it straight down. And having it fall straight down in the beginning shows, one, a controlled demolition again, not anything based on planes going, in which possibly these were holographic missile strikes, is what one guy was saying. So there's a lot of question, and you can't go back and do it except by looking very carefully at all of the visual, digital elements that are there, and then do it. And I've heard some engineers say that they looked at, and there was widespread, that's why they formed that nonprofit, is this is bogus. This isn't right, and we're going to get to the truth. And the truth is already there. We already know. It's just that we have to convince people who are not thinking that that was what happened. No, it isn't. And they're not thinking correctly. It's like the media has them under what? A trance. And that comes from what? Lots of different things. And that's what they're also testing, is their program working? And then who's not falling under the program. So, like I say, this is a multifaceted thing that is far beyond the scope of the average citizen to even get into. And that's what I wanted to put out there. It's very deep in the sense of what was being done was not just a simple, take the trade centers down. There was a lot of testing, and military loves to do one thing, verify that they've got an operational system. And that's my little insert in there. What do you think, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, all points I think are valid on it. So I'm always curious to hear everybody's view on this. I actually have a question for both of you. One thing that I was wondering was getting back to or talking about World Trade Center 7, and I'm going to put up a poll on Facebook now. If we knew more about World Trade Center 7 on September 11th, do you think that more people would have questioned the official theory?
Well, I'm kind of surprised they didn't, since that was, quote, unquote, brought down. No, there was no reason to take it down, but there were a lot of investigations that had data that was in that building that the Bushes and many in government did not want to deal with, in my opinion, as I have heard, and that if, cornering all that, in which might have been the precipitating event to bring this about, is to cover some things that they wanted done, but they wanted it to be something that didn't tie to anybody breaking into the building and trying to take that stuff out. That would be unable to be denied, and it could lead to people being in trouble. What better way than a national event that blew up the buildings, and then the Trade Center had to be taken down? Well, that doesn't make any sense, because there was nothing wrong with Trade Center 7 building. So it was taken down happenstance. Well, okay, that had to be set up. Why was that set up to even go? And why did Silverstein, the owner, who collected quite a bit of insurance too, billions, bring it down? He had to be told to bring it down. Who told him to do that, and why? I remember when they were questioning him. I think it was Silverstein. I think that was his name. Why did they, question him? Why did he do what he did right at the same time? It doesn't make any sense at Building 7 at all, as it were unaffected in the whole thing. It was next to the buildings, but it had no effect on that building. But yet it had to be taken down on the same day. That actually puts information out there that this was a setup to cover investigations that were depending on the evidences and the evidence that was stored in that building that they wanted to eliminate.
Yeah, Walter, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we got Sean. Sean, are you here?
Hello, Sean.
Sean Ackley.
Sean
Are
Ackley.
you there?
Hello, Sean.
Sean Ackley is live. Yeah, go ahead. You're actually live right now.
Hey,
yes,
we can hear you, Sean.
Oh, great. Hey, how you guys doing?
Hey,
I'm at the 9/11 Film Festival in Oakland.
Well, thanks for joining us.
So tell us, how's that going? So you're in Oakland right now. You're at the 9/11 Festival, the Truth Festival. What's it like there?
Well, there is actually a lot of people here. I'm thinking about as busy as it's been in other years. There's only a few seats empty, and I'm thinking it's doing pretty good. And we're in an intermission right now. But they've got a really good program, sf911truth.org.
Who's their guest speaker?
Oh, well, they got a lot of people. Hang on a second. I got my program schedule right here. Okay, so one event that I was surprised at, because I'd never heard the case before, is Judy Bari. And this is actually an earlier case, I guess back in the 1970s, but it has a lot of interesting COINTELPRO parts to it. So if you want to look at Judy Bari, you should definitely look into that case. Let's see here. The Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. And the next movie's coming up here is going to be Anatomy of a Great Deception.
Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah. So definitely, head on over to sf911truth.org. They've got a live stream going, and they have. Then you can go back into the archives as well. And they're going to start back up the film festival here in a few minutes. But they've got all the details there and a program schedule and all the details. Plus, they're hosting the No Lies Radio as well.
Okay, so sf911.org, is that what you said?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Oh, sf911truth.org, yeah.
Oh, okay, sf911truth.org. Thank you.
That is correct.
So what do you think of it so far, Sean? Is it
well, I just saw a couple
we see every year?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, do you guys do video too, or do you just do a call-in?
We just do call-in.
Oh, you just do a call-in. Okay. Well, yeah. So they got Guns and Butter here, Bonnie Faulkner, of course. And if you didn't know, Guns and Butter was taken off the air at KPFA.
When was that?
Earlier this year, I guess.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so yeah, there's
okay.
a big thing with that. You can still catch your show on a different network, but I guess KPFA doesn't want her on the air anymore.
I think that was 2 weeks ago, Greg.
Yeah.
What's that, Stan?
That was 2 weeks ago. I think they pulled her broadcast down about 2 weeks ago.
Did they give any reason or any? Yeah.
It was the broadcast she did on a certain topic, and they didn't just take the topic down. They removed her entire show and all the archives as well, I believe.
They did.
Oh,
yeah, all the KPF archives are gone for the Guns and Butter show. But she's here tonight. She said if you go to Guns and Butter, I don't know if it's gunsandbutter.com or .org, I can't remember, but go to Guns and Butter on the internet, and she's got at least 3 or 4 years of shows on her own website on SoundCloud, I guess. So get them while you can. And then she also sells CDs of all of her shows as well. And, of course, architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth are here again. Ken, of course, is doing all the filming. And you guys want an update from architects and engineers?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Hey, you guys want to give a little update on what's happening with architects and engineers for a live radio program? You want to do a little update on what's happening with architects and engineers? It is recorded. Do you have anything public to say about like lawyers or any of your information here? No? Okay. So they have a table here, and they're selling DVDs like they normally do. And Bobby McIlvaine, please look up Bobby McIlvaine on the internet. He's got a new case. You can donate money for his justice program, and and then there's also a lawyers initiative coming out too, where they're doing a lot of information, and they need money for that too. So, and then of course we've got Mickey Huff. You can look at Mickey Huff, which brings out all of the stories that were basically put onto the archives and never produced on the news. And so definitely look up Mickey Huff. And he's going to be speaking a little bit later too. So,
was there any Bay Area news actually covering 9/11 that indicated that they are supporting investigation in the local news outlets?
Oh, no. If there's any local news coverage, maybe there'll be a little blurb about something about the theater or something like that. But there's never, I've been here for many, many years, and there's never any news broadcast of this at all. So we just try to get out what we can on YouTube and shows like yours, and No Lies Radio, etc. has information on this. So.
Well, glad to have you on that then. Wow. Okay.
I've got an update as well.
Go for it.
The Guns and Butter program was canceled on Friday, August 17th.
Wow.
That's the date. It's coming up. It's been 3 weeks now, almost a month.
Crazy. And that is gunsandbutter.org. Hey, Sean, can you tell us how many people would you say are there, if you had to guess?
Oh, well, I don't know. I mean, it's a theater that has what is the capacity? I have no idea. I mean, there's hundreds of people here. There are not thousands. There's hundreds of people here.
This is at the Grand Lake Theater in Oakland, California. I'm going to look that up. How many people it can hold? Usually they do get a lot of people. I spend most of my time at the vendor booth because that's where I really got to chat with people. And I would say, if anybody's going there, if you're going to go there in the future, spend some time chatting with the people at the vendor booths. You'll get a lot of good different topics, a lot of good different people with a lot of good different views.
Absolutely. There's 3 vendor booths this year, and they're going strong, and they always sell DVDs and Project Uncensored. Like I said, Mickey Huff is here as well, and he's always here with some great information.
And I think also with the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, Barbara Honegger is going to be at that booth as well.
Oh, really?
I think she's going to be there on site.
Oh, wow.
Barbara Honegger is going to be here?
I believe she's at the Oakland or San Francisco location.
Oh, that's right.
Sean, you better go find her.
Ask her about the Robert Alexandra case if you get a chance as well.
Yeah.
Was there 2 locations this year?
Well, I don't know if it was San Francisco, but if it's in Oakland, it's probably nothing in San Francisco, or vice versa.
I'll ask them. I don't see her listed here, but sure, I can go check.
Yeah, find out if she's there. Maybe we can get her on for a couple minutes.
Okay. All right, guys. Hey, you continue strong. And how much longer are you going for?
We're gonna go back on. Why don't you, if you want to come and join us back on, just go ahead and do it, man.
All right. Now, how much longer are you there for?
We're going to be on probably for another hour, maybe 2. So I don't know who's going to be on here with me, but I'll definitely be on here for another hour or 2.
Okay, thanks a lot, guys. And
okay, guys.
Signing off here from the Trend Festival. So.
Thanks, Sean.
Okay, bye.
Thank you a lot, Sean.
Oh, that was good. I was glad we got that in there. Yeah.
I wish I was going to go to Grand Lake. You'd have been at that.
Yeah.
And it's Dan. Are you still out there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Oh, good. Okay. And one of the things that this kind of thing touches on such a wide scope, and there's probably people, specifically in the Pentagon, that handle this type of thing. That there's not anybody with all of the reins in their hand. That would never be. But there is someone that assigns the people to take the reins, so to speak. And they're not in government. I'll say that. And one of the things that interested me is when Rockefeller, wanted to open investigations in several different things and went to the president with that. That was a very public action. And, of course, Rockefeller died at 101. But behind the scenes, these are the people, I think, well, definitely, because you have to realize in the Miracle Mile, there's a city-state there. That's the banking area. That is a city-state. And it is, and you know what they call it? The crown. It's not based because it's in England. But guess what that represents? The crown belongs to he who rules, right? And it goes back to, have you ever heard the golden rule? He who has the gold makes the rules. And do you think that is why they call it the crown of gold? And I see that in the 3 city-states that we have that rule the world, which I have mentioned, which this all ties into, and which ties into the Vatican. So as much as that goes, what? No, that is one of the most, I think, intricately interwoven within and throughout society, throughout the world, is that, along with the banking element. And the Pope, who says he is the face of God and the spokesperson of God and is God on earth. So these things are have some deep roots that support the tree that we don't see. And that's why I bring it up slightly here. And the threefold flag with the 3-star flag, of course, is the Miracle Mile in London, city-state, the Vatican, city-state, Washington, D.C., a city-state. And one of the problems with that is that when anybody's elected in, they're citizens of the United States, but foremost, like any other city-state, first is the city-state. That is the location of the rulers that separate themselves from us, and they rule as they see fit.
Yeah, and getting back to 911, I think what I really want to see, because what you're talking about, how does this relate to 911? Or maybe Dan, if you want to give some view of. Obviously 911 is not just about 911. It's got to be about something bigger, right?
There's a bigger picture involved.
Yeah, I think there's up to a dozen other things going on behind the scenes on the events of 9/11. Multiple things with multiple strings being pulled all at the same time. So the average person in the street thinks it's one reason Muslims attacked us. The farther you get into it, you know that there's 2 or 3 things going on behind the scenes. Multiple people benefit from Silverstein with the asbestos in the buildings, to wanting to get a new building there. And like you said earlier, Walter, the investigations, I think there was 340 investigations going on currently in the WTC 7 building where the SEC was held, and the IRS that were all thwarted. And the 2 big ones were the WorldCom investigation and Enron. And then you get the floor number 23, which is the Emergency Operations Center for the City of New York. That's where the mayor goes during an emergency, and Giuliani never went there. That's where everyone should have been, on the 23rd floor. But when Barry Jennings went there, all he found is empty coffee cans and donuts. So a large group of people were in that room doing something that morning in World Trade Center 7. But when the bombs didn't go off as expected, which I think they were supposed to go off between 9 and 10 a.m. and bring that building down amidst the other buildings coming down all at the same time to cause the chaos. And because it didn't go down until 5:20 p.m., it was one of the biggest errors or the blunders on the planning part. But I think that building needed to come down to squash all of those investigations. And then you get Building 6 that had the giant hole that wasn't controlled demolition, but a giant bomb explosion went off, causing the hole in that building that also had underneath the building in the basement, the vaults left wide open with all the gold bullion missing. The early morning hours of 9/11, when people reported to work, they said, "Why is that vault open?" And then the buildings all came down, and nothing was ever mentioned about it since. And then you get the bonds, the $240 billion of bonds, of the 10-year bonds that came due on September 12th, that the deep state used to bring down the Soviet Union to end the Cold War in 1991. That was called Project Hammer, to start buying up all the property and to ruin the ruble. What was it? The Russian ruble, the currency, brought the entire thing down in 89, 90, and 91. But in order to do that, it was the hundreds of billions of dollars to do that. All were taken out on 10-year bonds that needed to be repaid on September 12th of the year 2001. And so after the 9/11 events, you strangely see an emergency act put into place in the SEC, which allows all the funds to be cleared anonymously, and then the Security Stock Exchange shut down for a couple of days, which has never, ever, ever happened.
Yeah, that's true.
So now you get this anonymous funding coming through, the money missing, the gold missing, the $240 worth of bonds clearing through anonymously, so no one knows where that came from or where that was headed. That's when you get into, I believe, all of the tentacles of everything that was going on that day. Regardless of where it took place, there was a multitude of things going on.
Yeah, it was a clearinghouse day.
The clearinghouse, yep. The clearinghouse was shut down, and when they turned it back on, I think those funds cleared anonymously. From what I've read, they couldn't have the bandwidth to transfer all the data of the who and the from and the senders and the companies' names, but they were able to do it on a clearinghouse with a limited bandwidth that allowed only the dollars and the dates to fund through, but not who was sending what to who. So it all went through anonymously. No one talks about that.
Yep. And that's wherein I think is the whole process, especially regarding one thing, the gold. Because that was an important asset that vanished, frankly.
Yep. Huge.
And then you talk about the other issues that were covered in Building 7 going down. As I mentioned, I didn't go to the details. I like this. It just ended the problem. A lot of problems were tied up in a neat little bow with that.
And then you get the Donald Rumsfeld on the day before announcing the $2.3 trillion being missing, where he coincidentally installs a team of 50 accountants on that certain wing of the Pentagon with all the paperwork documentation to start the research, and having 49 of those 50 accountants now dead, along with that investigation now squashed. So lots of people and lots of organizations benefited in various ways on 9/11.
Yep. And it was a long-term planning to put all of that into place. And the problem that came up was the fact that you brought up earlier, Dan, is the fact that Building 7, didn't drop till after 5 o'clock, which is highly suspect. And then Silverstein was brought up publicly, and he said, and he just made a dumb statement. It had to be brought down. It had to be. And I didn't, and my question at the time was, why and what's the reason to bring the building down? It was obviously not due to structural deformities.
But yeah, they played the card that it was due to safety reasons and whatnot, that it's just best to bring the whole thing down.
Yeah, it was right next to those that went down, so we just took it down too. But,
yeah,
you know, the problem that came up is, how did you set all the charges to do that so fast?
That is a problem.
You know, and in 1 hour, in a few hours there, you had the whole building set up. And all the chaos. It doesn't make sense because it would have to be preset.
And there could be a whole episode, Greg, done on just the errors that were made on that day. You know, many things of the operation were pulled off perfectly, I think, although I hated it. But the bad guys did a lot of things right that day. But leaving that truck in the vault that couldn't get out when it stalled, the loaded truck full of was it a 3-axle truck full
of gold.
Pulled in, couldn't get out when everything went down, so they left it abandoned there. That was one mistake. WTC 7 not coming down until 5 o'clock was another mistake. The charges going off in the lobby of World Trade Center 1 before the first plane even hit, and that what impacted Bobby McIlvaine's son, who was killed before the first plane even impacted the first tower because of the large explosion in the lobby. And then there were explosions going off in the basement. And so the poorly timed events of all of those things, but ultimately it went off without a hitch, but there's multiple mistakes all the way through. And I think that's why George Bush reading the book to the children in the school was it was a delay mechanism, because I think they whispered in the ear and says, you know, that the Pentagon hasn't been hit yet. And so he had to stall a few minutes for the Pentagon to get hit because that missile was running late, or those explosions as well. Then when that explosion went off, then he was able to say, I'm going to go in the air and go to Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska, and take cover because of all this is going on. But he had to stall. Lots of things, from the planning perspective, went horribly wrong that day as well.
That was noticeable for certain there, because I heard the news story about the gold broke very quickly, and Silverstein was on fairly quickly, explaining.
Do we have a lot of proof about that gold? I've been looking for good sources. The reason why I didn't put that in my book was because I could not find a really good source on it. I don't know if you guys.
I didn't find any source of anything about that gold. There's nothing I found.
I think
it's fascinating.
Between that and the $240 billion in bonds, a lot of that stuff has been swept and cleaned up and scrubbed from the web. But I think there's an article. There's a couple of good articles that are out there, but not many. Most of that has all been cleared out, I believe, and that's what led me to indicate to me that was what was really going on behind the scenes. Like Walter said, that was probably the top priority, was those things. And the buildings coming down and all the other nonsense they had was just collateral damage, just to keep the chaos going for the day, for the media, for the sheep to be, inundated with everything.
Sure. Yeah. So if there's anybody out there who has any good sources or can lead us, to find out more about that gold, I would love to find those sources. Dan, I know you recently did a video with Greg Ford. Maybe you can explain a little bit about who Greg Ford is, and then kind of give us a little overview of Greg Ford's view on September 11th, 17 years later.
Well, Greg Ford is a former military intelligence, what was he? He's a counterintelligence agent, and spent a lifetime in the military, and was the medic going through medical school. Was the medic assigned in Iraq after we invaded Iraq to be in charge of that unit at Abu Ghraib prison. And so when he was there working in that capacity, and that's when they started bringing the young kids and the children and the women to him, saying these people are ill here in the prison. And he's like, well, these people have been shocked and electrocuted and tortured. What's going on with it? Oh, they just slipped and fell. And he's like, well, that's not the case. What's going on? So he got into the fact that they were using the car batteries and the electrical prods and sodomizing these people. And later on, he found out about the raping of the victims and the murders of actual detainees. Now, this facility wasn't a prison that housed convicted criminals. This was just a detention center where they picked up people off the street to question and interrogate them. So none of these people potentially were even guilty of doing anything. They're just picked up off the street by the U.S. military. So when he blew the whistle on that is when they strapped him down to a gurney, flew him out to Germany, and jacked him up with MK Ultra drugs and SSRI medication, and called him a lunatic and a madman. So they shipped him back out, and then have been discrediting him ever since. So he's been lately doing some whistleblowing on what he has seen over there in Iraq and 9/11 and the Philip Marshall case. He was the investigator there with Wayne Madsen, who first went to the property there the weekend after the bodies were found and researched the information there on the Philip Marshall murders. So I've been doing some work with him and some of his background. And although him and I and Philip Marshall actually don't agree on a lot of things with 9/11, we still agree in total that it was a lie that was perpetrated. But Philip Marshall, the captain, thinks that with enough training, that he thinks Philip Marshall thought before he was assassinated, that he thinks that they were here for so long because they were getting the training from Boeing pilots and from Boeing. They did have hours and hours, and they did complete the stunts to make 9/11 happen. So he believed that, but was pissed because the U.S. allowed it to happen. Now, Greg Ford is one, I think, who believes that they also were in on planning to do this, and whether or not they did it or not, I think he believes that the plan was for the Saudis to do this, and the U.S. just stuck in early, got it done, and prevented it, but got it done quicker with using the patsies as a blaming mechanism to blame them. So but he's been good on a lot of topics. He recently suffered a stroke back in March that was pretty serious, and then so he's back doing some interviews now. But I'm trying to get as much time in with I can, because he's having a tough time speaking and getting his words out, and he had to relearn a lot of his speech. So his background is very interesting with the money. The gold, and he's the one that I think now Walter will like this story, that when they went into Iraq and they were going after Saddam, he made it sound like the insurgency was there to get into the money, the gold, and the secret compartments in Saddam's various houses that held all of this cash. He himself witnessed $40 million missing from one of the homes that he said that the U.S. military was going to turn over to the public. He said nothing was ever written up about that at all. They all just stole it. He said that was $40 million he saw with his own eyes. And he was working with the Saddam Hussein's treasurer, or his top financial aid person, is who he was assigned to when he first went over there. And he said that he knows right off the bat that $40 million of cash went unaccounted for and simply swiped. In addition to the various gold, bullion, silver, gems, and everything else that they had accumulated, I think, from the Kuwait City attack from Hussein from the Desert Storm. So you get into this whole looting process, whether it's World War II with the Black Eagle Trust of the Nazi gold, or the Japanese Golden Lily funds that the U.S., where I personally believe the U.S. got involved in World War II because of General MacArthur found out about the Golden Lily in Japan and needed a reason for Japan to attack us to go get that gold, to get the treasure, to get the loot. And then we came out with the Nazi gold and the Black Eagle Trust. And it's a whole circle of wars that take place because of the looting. And Japan, after all those years, accumulated all this wealth from taking on the many years of looting China and Manchuria. And so that gives you a reason to have the raping of Nanking in the 1937s. They got, China was sitting on all wealth. So then Japan got all the wealth. The U.S. goes in after Pearl Harbor and gets all the wealth. And that's when they coincidentally end the OSS and start a thing called the CIA, because of, in my opinion, the unlimited amounts of black operation money, unaccountable black budget where spending would never have to be accounted for again. And I think that's why they're so successful after all these years. They can do whatever they want because they're not waiting for money from the government. They're sitting on a stack of gold from decades and decades and decades of gold from other nations that we have looted. So that's what gets back into, going into Iraq. Did we need to go to Iraq? Did they cause 9/11? No, they had nothing to do with it. But the way Greg Ford presents it is there was a lot to be had there after Hussein went in and did what he did in Kuwait City with all the gold and riches there. They got it all. And so now the U.S. went into Iraq to get it all and as well. Not as much as World War II, but we're talking billions of dollars of money, cash, gold, gems, and bullion. And that's why these wars take place. Afghanistan, the only reason, once again, it's the opium, it's the heroin. That's the only reason they're in Afghanistan.
Well, one thing I can add to this, and something that came up in a friend of mine's military stuff, he said they were also looking for documentation. And the military is interested in one thing, what? Superior armament or superiority in all that they get. And they were after what Saddam had, they said, in ancient documents that described technology that the government wanted also, because that is a bigger non-spoken thing. And me being in the military, I asked questions when I was in, and sometimes they said, shut up, and sometimes they said, told me things, and I'll leave it at that. But the fact is, they were looking about ancient documents that had technology that sounded, well, strange. I'm going to not go into detail on it, but that they wanted to get. It's not also just the gold and all of that, but they were looking for technology. And actually, Reagan wanted to find the 4 angels of the apocalypse at the Euphrates that are chained there, based biblically. But and that's the strange side of things, and ultra secret stuff of looking up the technology to put in use for the U.S. military and their allies. Sounds strange and weird, but that also comes into play as a facet of this. That is what you call the weird and the things that people think, oh, that could, no. But, however, I ran into things where now I understand from being in the military that they do things that you almost consider movie-like. And they were digging in there, and they did take away things, ancient scripts and ancient things from the temples and everything that they were in Iraq to pick up. And some of the soldiers talked about that. And even the ones that talked about the giant of Kandahar and these types of things that don't come up. There are things they go there and do to clean up and also to get advantage in technology, which is always their pursuit.
Yep, it's very true, and it comes back to the word control. Any way that the U.S. military can get control of something, whether it's the artifacts or technology or money or gold or oil, it's the control. And I think this started off with the HARP technology in Alaska was built mainly, I think, to be able to see incoming missiles coming over the horizon to be able to shoot down in advance. But once they found out they can do that, they said, well, let's use that technology then now to start altering the weather. Now let's take it another step farther. And that's when they get into trouble, when they start taking everything to the next level. So it's just too much.
Yeah, and there's the other level which HARP could deal with, which is, we'll just say gates or portals like CERN, and that getting to some place quick and fast without having to use any type of technology. And that was something that is not commonly spoken of, is the fact that they are terribly interested in portals that can give you an edge, and they actually talk about going back in time in their estimation or belief that this could be possible, along with accelerated travel beyond the speed of light. And this type of, not technology, but through gates, stargates, and that type of thing, which ties heavily into electromagnetic manifestation and manipulation.
Yeah, it's wild. It's wild stuff. How far and how deep this all goes, but yep, it's all about the control, and whether it's you can control the weather, or if you can set off a mid-sized earthquake in a certain location, or stall a hurricane over a certain city, like we saw with New Orleans, or you can see weather patterns that just don't make sense nowadays, that we've seen the last couple of decades. That's just a strange weather phenomena and all the hurricanes and whatnot. I don't know if it can create these events, but they can either magnify them or beef them up or stall them or keep them dragging on longer than anticipated. But they can manipulate. So it gets back into the manipulation of something that's natural, and so it really impacts things.
Yes, and I've noticed that in recent times, especially with the current hurricane and the one that was hitting around Hawaii and Japan, that they say was the biggest, strongest hurricane in the last 20 or 30 years. And but when they said 135 miles an hour, I thought, no, it hadn't hit the high mark yet, which would be, I think, if we start seeing one 155 to 170, then you're starting to get into mega. And I think we'll see that in our lifetime.
It could be. Yeah, Brad, be careful out there in Texas. I know there's some stuff coming up. But
I'm very aware of a lot of stuff here in Texas. Texas is a Masonic state, and we'll get into Masons.
Yeah, that's a whole other issue.
That's a bigger.
I'm really curious if either of you listened to Donald Trump's speech today.
I didn't.
I did not. No.
Okay.
I wasn't interested today.
Good.
Did you listen to it?
Let me. Yeah. And it was not the Trump that we're used to hearing. You know, it was different, and there was a lot of the official theory stuff. You know, especially with Flight 93.
Oh yes, I did.
Yeah,
I heard a lot of that.
Yeah, and I'm like, wait a minute. Okay, so there's some lady, right? Her husband died in Flight 93, according to the official theory, and the only thing she wanted was her husband's ring, and I think a couple other things. They were able to find the husband's wallet, his ring, all of this stuff, and I'm like, wait a minute, what? How were they able to find all of that? And they couldn't even find blood. There was no blood found. There was nothing. How were they able to find all of this stuff? So that really bothered me. Really,
that's
Trump,
strange.
the whole thing. But it didn't seem like the Trump that we would see on Twitter or hear on Twitter and all that stuff. It was very, very different. So the other question that I had for both of you is, how do you think 9/11 ties into JFK?
Believe me, that's a deep one. But one of the things that is important to understand is Bush. That's one link that is there, not only to JFK, but his brother also. And that is another story altogether. And you can't talk that in 5 minutes or 10 hours maybe.
No, but you're definitely saying that it does tie in.
There is a tie-in there, yes, because it's a presidential position. Kennedy, see, this President Trump, as much as he is quote unquote for the people, nobody that's in that office is for the people. Not after Kennedy. Everybody is carefully selected for that position.
Yeah, but do you really think Kennedy was there for the people? I'm not sure. I'm not so sure.
Well, he wasn't there for the people. None of them really are. But the problem is he was doing things that were not apropos. You know, when you say you're going to crush the CIA and throw it to the wind, Do you think that made an impression upon the world powers?
That's still a quote. Yeah, but that's still a quote. I'm having a hard time.
I'm wanting to vet that one, but that would be one that would get him killed pretty quick. But the bigger thing, and I think this was a banker issue to some extent, because he was going back to the Constitution, oh, God help him, of running of things, and taking from the Federal Reserve. There was the big one, money. You always follow the money. He was going back with silver certificates backed by silver, and why not gold? Maybe he knew there wasn't any. But when you start messing with the Federal Reserve, that's messing with your life. I think it wasn't about aliens. It wasn't about secret societies, although he was against that per se in one speech, and that he thought it was repugnant. But the one thing that he did was he changed the money and was going to bankrupt the Federal Reserve. He was going to shut them down. I think that's what got him killed. So how does it tie in? Really, it's all about money. And about, now, I could throw in one other thing. The bankers and the ones, even though they're running the show, they're not the ones that are in control. There are leaders that are in control that direct others that cannot be touched. And I'm going to leave it at that, because that's a story that takes a little more investigation and a little tie-in. It could tie into Antarctica even. But it's a worldwide consortium, you could say.
Sure.
What got Kennedy killed, you know, when you talk about getting rid of the Federal Reserve, you will die in trying. Nobody that goes against the Federal Reserve will live. Kennedy went against the CIA possibly, and also the Federal Reserve. When that was done, when he said and he had the money, he just started printing silver certificates. He authorized it. He started it, and he pushed the wrong buttons with that. And I think that is truly what got him killed. And that is how it ties in. He ran against the threefold city-state mandate of how things are to be run. We're not to close down Federal Reserves. We need to expand them, like you see happens in Europe, happens in South America, happens fiat money. All this putting it in who? The bankers' control. Who are under the control of who? Well, maybe they wouldn't like to talk about that too much. But the problem is, this is what it's all about. Controlling the money, controlling the food, controlling the land, controlling the people, the fourfold cover under the three city-states, which are leading mainly to one thing, which is tying it all together. Here it is. They're going to the 1,000 points of light, the New World Order, Sophia, that's a goddess that created the 7 eon, in which they put our Heavenly Father in that under Sophia. What is the AI robot's name? Sophia. And it's tying in to go towards a new world government, and enforcers will be the image of the beast, the AI that are maybe possessed, who knows. But the thing is, it's going towards a one world government, and this is where all these things tie together to go towards. It is to produce this government. Every major player in government who is together are buddies, masons, and rulers that are going towards 1,000 points of light, becoming that which is one. And they are waiting, and that's tied to the Jews, the Vatican, and every state and every country in the world. So in my opinion, based on what I have seen, these things are all slowly but surely annihilating sovereignty, breaking up and dividing people, and leading to an event that will unify all under an umbrella of one world government.
Okay, Dan, do you have any thoughts on the ties between JFK and 9/11?
Well, I don't know about the tie between it. I know that
or just anything that was said. Sure.
The JFK is, I still believe, much like 9/11, it's a quote. It's a riddle wrapped in a mystery, inside an enigma. There's so many things going on in JFK. I think, like with Walter, it was him going after the Federal Reserve and printing off the Kennedy 57 bills or the 57s that were already printed, and so he was going after Federal Reserve, which you do not do and stay living. He's going after the CIA. Like Walter said, I'm going to crush it into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the wind. That's what you do not do, and it gets him killed. He was also had problems with the military and the mob. So many, many things. Now, when you start going after the Federal Reserve, it gets back to going back to another president, Abraham Lincoln, who wanted to change the currency.
Yep.
And then he gets offed. Now, that was not some random Hinckley shooter. That was also an assassination to rub him out. And so that's what the American people, the public, know the first or second layer of all these stories from the propaganda, but they never know the real underbelly of what's going on behind the scenes. And I think that's why Kennedy was taken out. Kennedy taken out the same way Lincoln was taken out, and the same way with Trump here talking about a currency reset, Federal Reserve, going after the CIA, all the same types of logic that's got him in the crosshairs. I believe already there's been assassination attempts that we just haven't heard about against Trump, in my opinion, that hasn't made the news. But I think he's under a shitstorm of what he's about to do. Now, going back to today's comments, although I didn't hear the speech, I saw two things that made me roll my eyes with Trump today. One is the heroes of 9/11 that took over the plane and took it over, and the strong will and the heroic flight that we had, that's all bogus. I think Trump knows that. And then he says that Giuliani was the mayor at the time who's considered a true hero. He's working with me here today, and he's a true hero of 9/11. There's not not many people that discuss me more with 9/11 than Rudy Giuliani. And so whether he's saying that as a cover for what's really going on behind the scenes, I don't know, but I think he knows better than that. Giuliani certainly was one of the bad guys who didn't go to his own emergency bunker on 9/11, and certainly the Flight 93 was not overtaken by heroic people who stormed the cockpit. And so those are the two things that Trump decided to go with today, and I don't buy either of those.
Do you think that maybe Dan, do you think that maybe Rudy Giuliani, or Brad too, do you guys think that maybe he was also sheltered from this? Maybe the reason why he wasn't there in Building 7 is because he was told not to go there, blah, 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 and then basically told to just shut up, kind of like how everybody else seems in the government was told to just shut up. Maybe even George W. Bush was told to just shut up.
I don't know. They're very complicit. Whether they're told to shut up or they do it on their own, they're still following illegal, treasonous orders, I think. So Giuliani was behind it. I mean, FEMA was setting up camp there the night before on one of the ports for some drill or something. So I think Giuliani was well aware of everything going on in New York City, especially Larry Silverstein's request with the New York Port Authority to do an investigation and how much it would cost to bring the buildings down because he didn't want to pay for the asbestos. So he had estimates being done already to see how much it would cost to bring the towers down because they were loaded with so much asbestos. Giuliani was probably more than aware of those dealings that he had, and they kept saying, no, you can't, it's too expensive, you can't bring the towers down. So that's, I think, when Silverstein said, I'm going to just buy up the land, then I'll buy up the property, and then take out a huge insurance policy, and I'll take care of it myself. Problem solved. So I don't buy Giuliani. Now, I'm also not to say that Giuliani hasn't since turned and is a white hat today. That could entirely be possible. I didn't like him back in the 9/11 events. He was, I think, definitely a bad guy back then, a black hat.
I think he was part of it also, because he would have been instrumental in support. And the thing is, the day before this, we also have to realize that the building was shut down for, there was a security shutdown, and many people came in there. And I think we're doing the final setup for the charges. It was shut down, and there were many people
a couple weeks prior.
Yeah,
right.
It was down, and they had many people in there working in various areas not normally done. So
yeah, I think that is true. There was electrical outages, and there was weekends with the security cameras off, the elevator reconstruction or the renovating of those elevators. They had certain floors that were having work done on them. Yes. There was intermittent, power outages and things that he would have, I think, been more than knowing what was going on in all three of those, or all four of those buildings.
Yeah, and thank you, Greg, for correcting and saying 2 weeks, because it did do that. But the day before, I think they were going through the final checks and making sure everything was ready to go.
Yeah, which goes back to John O'Neill, who died on September 11th on his first day at work.
And there were
Dan,
many...
have you... Go ahead, Brad.
No, go ahead and finish. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, Dan, you've been following Q, so have you seen any updates on September 11th on that? Anything that's coming through?
No, I haven't in particular. I know that President Trump tweeted something yesterday, and so did Q, that had the American flag with 9/11 on it, that tied back into it, and so it still gives people hope that that's at the end of the deep state draining here is going to be the 9/11 resolution, but I think that'll be farther, many months down the road. But I think personally, I think it's part of the plan. But I don't have a lot of support with that theory.
You know, I've been looking at other truthers out there, and there's one guy I hadn't vetted yet that is called, let me see, what was it? Truth Collector, and he had produced some stuff. They got a lot of views anyway back in 2013. Have y'all heard of anybody by that name?
No, I haven't.
No.
It's called Truth Collector. Let me check. Let me put this in real quick.
The good one is, while he's doing that, the good one is Neon Revolt lately has been very good. But one of the things that's, for those who do follow Q, is they have put in different timings of tweets versus Q postings. And in the past, there's been one that's been, I think, exactly 15 minutes apart, and they call that a deviation. President Trump will tweet, or Q will make a drop, and 15 minutes later, something similar. And then a few months ago, it was exactly 10 minutes deviation of the post. And then recently, it was 5 minutes. And so the request went in, I think it was Saturday night this week, to say, hey, with 9/11 coming up, can we get a zero deviation post? And sure enough, I think it was 10 minutes later, Q and Trump tweeted the exact same minute of the exact same hour using the exact same topic. So that kind of put the final nail in the coffin for those doubting the whole QAnon, because the timing was the exact minute. And then Q went on to post, there you go, have a good time. So they're posting now exactly. They've done, I think, 4 different simultaneous posts: a 15-minute deviation, a 10-minute deviation, a 5, and then one right on the nuts of the exact. Now it just took place on, I think that was just Sunday.
Everything in Washington is scripted, though.
Well, yeah. Could they be hacking Trump? I mean, I'm not going to go that far because of Clinton, of how easily she was hacked because of what she was doing. But it's a totally different thing. But that is weird. That timing is very weird to me, and it's something that people need to pay close attention to, I think.
And also, we need to look at the vice presidents in this, where you notice that we don't ever get them mentioned. There's some key people in the vice presidency, and we need to.
Pence is like a robot. That guy is just like a robot. I don't know. He just creeps me out for some reason. I'm not sure why.
But there's some stuff. It's one thing to listen to Trump, but sometimes it's good to monitor the vice president ahead of time and see if there's any correlation with the president's actions or inaction. You could go either way with that, and watch that, because that's there. But getting back on point with 9/11, I think President Bush, for example, was totally aware of what was going on the day before, as I did also think Giuliani. And I think the Pentagon was definitely aware. There were changes in the training and the Air Force had, whole squadrons that were shifted for training out of the area.
Yeah, but were they? I mean, when you say they're aware, like I can buy that. These things happen, and duped in it. But how many people would really need to be in the know on something like that?
The generals that were doing the training and everything, no, they would. This is all highly compartmentalized. They wouldn't know about 9/11, but they would be told by the higher ups who did what to do. Oh, we're having training. Oh, now, yeah, I want it done. And no, as far as knowing about 9/11, that would have probably been 2 or 3, 4 people, maybe. That would be a high count about the facts of 9/11 happening and how it would go down. And remember your cards the playing cards that are put out that have these things, and games that were ahead that seem to predict or put these things out there. The ones that do these things always put something out there ahead of time, informing you ahead of time of these things that will occur.
Symbolism is very, very, they'll throw it in your face beforehand, and symbolism will be their downfall. There's always something there. One thing I think that, Greg, you touched on, and I don't know about the training exercises, but I do know that there was high level, was it, and maybe Walter, you'll know this too, the investigators probably for cases like this, the top level of the investigators were all out on the West Coast that weekend or that week doing some training or some kind of conference or convention, whereas the people that started the investigation and the cleanup efforts and the first responders were the backup secondary team in New York. And then when they wanted to fly the good guys back, all the planes and the flights were shut down nationwide, so they couldn't get those good top quality investigators who would have spotted this junk because they were not there.
Yes,
I don't know if that's FEMA, maybe that's a FEMA thing, I'm not sure, but the high quality echelon group weren't even there to begin the investigation because they couldn't get a way to get back into New York via any flights. All the flights were shut down.
I had heard something like that. I didn't follow up or know anything of that myself. This is the second time I've kind of heard of it, and I didn't give it any thought at the time, but that would make sense that they would do that if they were the ones that knew getting these types of things going or working it within the scheduling to have it occur when they were going.
Yeah. You pretty much get everybody who can actually do anything to stop this. You move them out, right? So that's kind of what looks like it happened here. It's just there were so many people that didn't know what was going on, and they couldn't get a hold of anybody.
Well, the FBI had prior knowledge, they said, that something was wrong, but did nothing. There was FBI things involved where somebody had warned them, saying, "Hey, this is a problem."
Yeah. There were many warnings.
And it's a shame, but everything was in place, but there were lots of indications that there was a problem. And, of course, they chose 9/11, 9/11. So that was their in-your-face type of element right there. Here's something to call in. And I'm sure, having one plane hit as an accident would be highly unlikely because a pilot wouldn't do that. And having 2 strike and then for them to come down would have been an impossibility in reality. But as I say, if you're going to tell a lie, tell a big one and stick to your story. And that's what they've done with this. And right now we've got a strong force of telling the truth. But it's been 20 years and there's nothing changed in the official registry regarding this. They're ignoring all of it. We're out here doing this, informing people, but frankly, they don't care anymore. It's done deal. And we should also bring up what
I'm not sure about that. You know what?
You got to understand.
I'm not sure about that. I really think that their view is panic, it's fear, and it's to get us to stay silent on it or to stay as quiet as possible. So that's why they censor us. That's why they purge us so much as possible.
Like they did Alex
But it's not going to work. Yeah, well, we're not going anywhere. These simple facts are not going anywhere. What I think we need to really focus on is to let people know, that it's okay to talk about this. We have 3 people here talking about the same topic. We don't agree on everything that happened on September 11th, but we can all talk about it, and we can all see that there is something very, very wrong here.
Well, yeah, there's lacking facts in the report.
Yeah, and there's many voters that are going to come out, and this is one of the big things with Trump, because he's done a lot of good things, a lot of good things, but this is the key for me. This is the big key, is his view on September 11th. Not only then, not only now, but also after he's not the president. That's a huge thing for me. So,
and it's important that you brought up election. The midterms are coming, and he's put a high emphasis. He said that if you don't elect basically Republicans, that the Democrats are salivating to take over.
Which is a fear tactic.
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't that fear? It's a fear tactic, and I don't like that.
I don't either. And I'm going, So, and as I see it, he is there.
But I think he's right, though. That's
it's
the
a
thing.
point that's true.
Yeah.
However,
anyway, go ahead.
The point is that the Democrats are, this is kind of staging up things. Now, they may tell Trump one other thing and Congress another, but I always point out, they only put presidents up there to keep the minds off of Congress and working and talking to congressmen. And the problem is Congress holds purse strings, the black ops, the committees in there. Everybody that does black ops doesn't tell the president. There are committees. Committees don't even know everything. There are very few, very, very few, that know the black ops picture. It's all segmented even there, because you can't get one guy to get it all. But it's all kind of sitting not only in the Pentagon, NSA, the CIA, it's all divided amongst even some offices that you don't know exist, but they are there, and they run things, and they do not exist in any official or unofficial even area. And they're told, you're separate, you don't exist, you don't contact anybody, here's your parameters. And they're let run loose. And they're given a budget. And I remember one time when I was on board, I needed something, and the captain said, don't worry about it, just tell me what you need. I'll raid a budget and get whatever you want. I went, oh, well, thank you. And so I learned very quickly from a political standpoint that the military, the Iron Triangle, is the one thing that does, as Eisenhower was afraid of, military-industrial complex, does tell the president what the hell to do, when to do it, and how to do it. This is one of the things that people don't understand, is a president is in charge, titularly in a sense. He has some power, but the real power lies in the Pentagon and in Congress and in banking and in operational endpoints, in-game type things, because the in-game and the event, they're talking about the event will occur, the event. This is what it is all pulling towards, is the event. Now, what is the event? Well, biblical people will look at it one way, the world another way, others their own particular way. But the event, as I said, is taking us to the one world government. And they're working to get the United States. They have to break the United States to get that. And they've got the European Union and Brexit. And all of these things are tying together in this world view of movement and sovereignty. And it ties into all these governments. And you see unification of Europe. You may see something come across for Africa soon because of their quote-unquote issues. So that have been given information on certain things, and I know certain things. And in this venue, we look to explore that. So we do that, and together we work it out. But be aware that we're trying to get these things done. And that's why I'm glad Greg brought you, Dan, and others here, Shane, and all of this together. We need more voices to bring all those pieces together.
This year.
Would you agree with that, Greg?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's the whole goal. Is to just get just to get all of these views and really to let people know that we can talk about this stuff.
Right. And
we don't have to be shamed. Yeah. Go ahead.
But I don't know everything, and that's why I was appreciative of Dan's points and even Eric's points before. And we need more voices in here, and we need opposing voices that challenge and vet and make us vet our information. And a lot of mine is pretty much on as far as I have seen. And, I mean, it gets into the national parks and things that I've mentioned to you about that. And why don't they talk about that? Well, people disappearing, Dave Pilates and missing 411, and how the government kind of pushes that under the rug. It goes so far, and it's the most, when I started looking at this, it scared me sometimes at what I was looking at. And if you're a human, maybe it should. But as I told people before, when you're dealing with these types of things, there are people interested in that will watch you because they're assigned to watch you and to handle you. Oh, you may not even know it, but it's there. And I'm always aware of that. And I keep my mind, circumspect, and I don't want to make any outlandish types of accusations or vetting something as true when I don't know. But one of the things important about 911 is it's totally obvious there's a problem. But you see many people totally oblivious and think we're idiots to pursue this. And that's why I'm glad we can have 3 people gather. Because I notice there's not a lot of hits on this type of information because we're put out as tinfoil hat people. And that's a good, those who are in charge know how to manipulate things to get people to be afraid to look. As you've noticed, the media does not treat 9/11 the way we do. And there were some that did it in the beginning. As you've noticed, that has changed. And
yeah, but that's the whole thing is, it's not always just about what we're putting out. It's the response. And,
yes.
That's some of the most valuable things that I've found is how the government responds. Like, what if somebody could really get up in Trump's face and ask him about World Trade Center 7? Then we get something.
Yeah, they would squash that. They wouldn't have that public. I would assume that would quickly be handled. And I think that's what the vice president is for, is watching the president. Or is today anyway. Because I think the vice president is the handler for the president. And that works as CIA. And as you notice, he is the final vote in the Senate. He sits and chairs the Senate. And that's the final place where House bills go from the House of Representatives and the Senate.
Well, they always say,
controls that.
True, he does. And they always say it's the quiet ones. Those are the ones you need to watch out for. And Pence is probably one of the most quietest vice presidents that I've seen in a long time.
I agree with that, and that scares me.
Yeah.
I have noticed him, and he's very circumspect with his words, and he's very careful. And there's body doubles there, and they have things. And you're talking about the president being handled and things like that. It's interesting that certain people can be replaced and you not know it, that they have been replaced by a body double. And if you've got a good body double, you don't know any better because they will act, speak, and sound. Maybe there will be a little variance in his way, like was noticed in the speech today. Maybe it's a body double speech.
I don't know about that.
I don't know.
I mean, yeah, it's hard to believe Trump would have a body.
Who could have a body double like Trump?
I mean, you never know.
Level of orange in there, but
that's all speculation. But yeah, we got way off in this speculation.
But the reality
Dan, you got to help us bring us back to reality here. Come on.
Yeah, the reality. I'll drop the notes there. Is the fact we're not going to get 911 truth like we're not going to get Kennedy truth. They've got it wrapped up tight as far as their perspective. Nobody is believing us. Not many. There's quite a few. I've noticed quite a few. But I get a lot of eye rolls and things like that. My wife particularly doesn't believe it and goes, oh, you're doing conspiracy stuff. Oh, my gosh. And you notice in the commercials, like the Sasquatch, with it was a commercial that I saw dealing with your bed cover. And it had Sasquatch there. And just like my husband and his silly conspiracy theories. And they put anybody that looks. And 911 was a conspiracy. It succeeded. Just who did it is the issue. And we have to be persistent.
Yep.
Dan, I haven't heard you. Let's speak.
Yeah, I think. Guys, I got to run in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Run in about 5 minutes, but I would like to say this and get you guys' viewpoint on this. What I'd like to say with JFK is there's so many people out there trying to solve it and try to get the answers to it, whereas then it breaks, it fractions off into fractions, all these different groups and buckets. But they're all underneath the same umbrella that we've been lied to. It didn't happen the way it was said. Now 9/11 is the same way. Everyone's got theories on what happened and what they think happened, and all these splinter groups are out there fighting each other as far as what happened. When what we need to do is just to simply prove, and I think we've already done that the official story cannot physically be true. 9/11 was a lie. We've been lied to. JFK killing, we've been lied to. I don't think it matters what the truth is or what really happened, but to get the fact out to the public that we've been lied to, and it's not a theory, it's a fact. And so that's one avenue I take, because sometimes you start having theories, and then people get you start getting argumentative and he said, she said, and different, with their backgrounds. Whereas if we just all hang together and say 9/11 was an outright lie, who cares what happened at the Pentagon or the towers? None of it could have been true. So don't spend the time on the actual solution on who did what, trying to point the finger at who the bad guy is that our government lied to us, the people, and that's all that needs to be said. Same with JFK, and that's what needs to be pushed. But that's just my opinion. That's my opinion. What are your guys' thoughts?
Well, I think that's true, and I think that's step one, and I think that's where I'm still at on both of these cases, is on step one, just trying to say, hey man, yes, there's something wrong here. We can prove the official theory is not true. Now, I'm not going to go and create my own theory on what I think happened. I'm going to leave that in God's hands. So I'm totally on board with that. Totally agree with that.
I kind of take Greg's view on that because JFK, there are so many possibilities. But we do know there were multiple gunmen. And even the driver was part of that, because when Kennedy said he was hit, and normally the plan is you step on the gas and you go when you hear that. He didn't. He was waiting for what? The kill shot. And they say the driver
slowed down,
which I don't agree.
Slowed down. Yeah, I don't agree.
So I don't associate any kind of conclusions, because at this point in time, with so much time passing, you have to go with the basic information that you have, and all the people that were around that. A lot of them are dead now. So it's hard to get real facts today. And I think, what's the guy's name? Oliver Stone, the
yep.
director?
Yes.
Yeah. came out with that movie with his perspective on it. But it doesn't solve the case. And the same with 911. Due to it's like there's many fingers in the pot. And it's a multi-phase, multi-plan, multi-person. And it's beyond just one person. You can't point a finger to one because it took a consortium of people to make this work. Believe me, it was military. It was private. And when you get something that big, that coordinated, even though there's errors and problems, you can't get a real definitive direction sometimes. You can get the bits and pieces and get an idea like Dan said. It's a lie. We know that. We need to figure this out. And it would take somebody in government who was probably more well-informed than us to actually break a case, so to speak, one involved. And I don't see that happening. But though we know it's a lie, based on the evidence, that's where we run into we can't go any further until we can get vetting and reality from those who are around it close enough that can bring forth that which we want, evidence. Look at this. Here's the smoking gun. And as much as we can talk about this truth, we just have to keep plugging at it. Although we may not get to the end of the road, eventually, as Greg said, and which I agree with, it's in God's hands, and He's going to deal with it.
Yep. All right, guys, it's been fun. I got to cruise though. You guys can feel free to continue with your conversation, but I gotta head out. Thanks again.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. Yep. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
God bless you, brother.
God bless indeed. That was a good one, Greg. I'm glad. I hope you joined us again.
He's been.
I learned some things through him tonight, which is good.
Yep. Yeah, he's awesome.
But now you wanted to bring something else up during this, which I don't know if you want to do that. What's your scope on it right now?
Well, what I really wanted to get into next is your view. I wanted to get your view. Where were you on 911? What did you think? How did people around you, how did they take it? How did they react to 911? And how did you deal with that, knowing that there was something weird here while other people were just like, oh, whatever the government says is true?
Well, I was on the bus coming in, and the bus driver announced it because he was listening to a radio on earphones. And he said, the World Trade Center has been attacked. And I went, what? And the first thing I thought of was, there was a previous attack by Muslims that didn't work, a bomb that was placed in World Trade Center 1, I forgot when it was, 93. And it was a imam that had been implicated in that. And I remember everybody was shocked, where it means they went, what? It was a physical reaction that was total shock and caused everybody to suck air and go, what? And I was going, whoa. And I couldn't wait to get to work so I could, guess what, turn on the TV and go, what's going on? And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't understand why that was attacked and who was involved in it. The first thing I thought of was somebody on the inside had to have something to do with this. Somebody knows something. And that can't just happen because they set up things that the military gets involved. And for something to be done like that, something happened in the military that they couldn't prevent it. Because a plane coming toward the World Trade Center or going into New York that's a commercial flight that's that large gets noticed easily and reported quickly. And I was confused as to why there was no action taken to prevent it. And when I got in and John had the television on, and we basically sat all morning as much as we could to watch it as we dealt with things in the network. So it was very, very interesting, but very troubling. And
because speaking of the network, were there any problems with any of the radio stations in that area?
As far as I remember, there wasn't any problem with any of our stations. We didn't.
And we had one in the New York area, right?
Yeah, WFME covered it from New Jersey.
Really?
That was
so they were covering it live?
We didn't break programming too much. We did.
Okay, but they were still rolling.
Yeah, there was probably, our news probably would have mentioned it. Marcy, Matthew, and those who were doing the news at that time. But we had such news insert that was pre-inserted that it was kind of hard to, get anything new unless we shut down from there and started going live. And I don't think they did that. They dealt with it more after the fact, in reality.
But there were no issues, because if there were any, websites down or any stations down in that area, you guys would have known about it.
I would have known about it, yeah. And back in that time, I was just JO operator, and John was the one in charge. But I would have known if anything would have gone down. None of our stations were affected.
Okay, so you guys are watching this. You're watching news. Are you guys watching Fox? Yes. Are you guys watching CNN? Fox.
We were watching kind of CNN and the local news stations, KTVU2.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, the local Fox station.
Local Fox stations.
And what are you guys thinking? Like, what is everybody thinking at the radio station? What is Harold Camping thinking? What is the general view here? Hey, do we just keep going? Do we send people home?
Well, that was the question. That was Craig Hulsebus that was working on that, but they just let it go. They just
tell us a little.
There's enough news stories out there. We don't want to chime in. We want to get people some calm in this storm. That's what I think the official thing might have been.
So they were trying to keep business going as usual.
Business as usual, yeah.
Business as usual. Okay.
Everybody, and of course, Craig was saying, "Hey, we need to cut in and start doing." But the common.
So Craig wanted to go live.
I remember him kind of like wanting to cut in, but the word was no.
And probably Charlie too, right? Because Charlie's there.
But I think they probably called Mr. Camping, "What should we do?" And I think Mr. Camping's thing was, "I don't know," but we just kept regular programming. There was no change in anything for us. So whatever they said didn't fly.
I've never heard Charlie's view on 911, and really many of the people that worked at Family Radio, they didn't really talk about it.
No,
except you.
Kind of like, well,
and then John talked about it negatively when I told him my view on it. But you were the only person, and my father-in-law, only two people that were open to it and were like, no, there's something strange here. Everybody else, either I never felt comfortable with, or if I talked to them, I could tell that they believe the official theory, and that's it.
And that's what I was bringing up in this earlier. Why is that people don't look at facts and go, wait, something is wrong. Greg, something is wrong. Is it that the media has their minds so brainwashed and controlled that they cannot respond? And
because I was watching it live, and I was one of those people that thought, okay, well, they're telling me it's Osama bin Laden, so that's what it must be.
And how come they came up with it immediately? Generally, it takes an investigation. It takes time to figure that out. But that was already neatly set up. And I went, how did they
That same day, they were able to figure that out.
All of the 19, they knew who the 19 were and started telling us that.
Yeah.
And it's called telling the lie right up front and getting people to take it and run with it. And then most people do that. And people don't think. And I went, that. And when somebody gets murdered, you don't know who the person did it just by questioning the people around and instantly, oh, it's them. And that's what they did. Anytime there's instant answer, it's called the instant gratification thing. There's a big lie in it when that happens. Big lie. And it's more than the CIA, the NSA, the military. This was an operation that involved worldwide cooperation. It was more than just our government. And, Bonder and all of those that, the Saudis, they had to be consulted about it first. We're going to say this. And I noticed they didn't get on and start screaming, "Oh, what? We never, no way." There was no public speaking from the delegate of Saudi Arabia, as you noticed. There was no screening of him and asking questions and things.
Oh, no, it was silent.
I think the media, I think somebody in media was aware, because they had a lot of cameras and a lot of people there doing different things. Their normal stuff, yeah, but there was a lot of media there, and of course they got them there quick. It was in New York, so you had a lot of power media able to jump in there immediately. But I think there was some cohesion even in them somewhere to be prepared and have everybody in set places to get this good, to sell the American public. And New York is where the major things for running government are set. And so we have to realize that New York was part of it. And I'm sure Giuliani was a guiding hand in some of that. And I think that a lot of people, now I don't have vetting on that, but just based on what I see, I assume he had to know. He was the mayor of New York. And the senators of New York, because all of these people were away from or moved away from that area. Anytime you see certain things, certain people go away from an area, when it's normal for them to do something else, that's a red flag. And with the military, a lot of red flags. And when I looked at it, I thought, this was done from the inside, but man, that would take a lot to do this. And it did. And we don't know all the parts and all the people involved. Because you're dealing with insurance companies and big power mongers that rule these things. And not only the fact, and I didn't mention it with Dan, but the reality is there's a spiritual aspect to this also. Evil, power. We're not dealing with flesh and blood, but darkness and powers in high places. So this was discussed. This was brought out by evil and a council somewhere to have this done. And for what purpose? To get the American people to do what? One, fear. And two, is to get them to do something. And it worked for the military. It worked for the political establishment. It worked to bring what together? All the people together as one for a cause. To get a great response, you need a great event. Pearl Harbor and this fits. And it brought everybody together, and people were joining the military. And it just worked out for everybody. That was a well-planned event, and it worked. And the media has most of the people totally lassoed as far as the events of 9/11 and the events of JFK. The thing tying together is media spin. Media spin. And the government's story is carried by the media. So the two things that tie it together, Greg, is the fact that, one, the media and the government and the spokespersons and the investigators are all, even though not connected and told, all work in unison to dispense the information that we get about it. Just like with JFK, just like this. This is how it works. The government works by those who hold the crown. The crown is in London. Why do they call it the crown? It isn't based on the monarchy there of the Windsors, of the Saxe-Gotha ruling clan. It's they are the rulers. That's why they call it the crown, the king of the world. But there's a problem. And now who calls himself the king of the world? Satan.
Yeah.
And so he's working out of the big three cities, the rulers in that, whether it be the Pope, the President, and the leader, mayor, Lord Mayor of the Miracle Mile. That It's tied to Satanism and Bohemian Grove. Bohemian Grove is where everybody of the big three cities, you look, you will not hear that the Pope attended that, but he does so, I think, via electronic means. There's something he has to do with that. Believe me. And the Lord Mayor of London, you don't know who that guy is. I bet he shows up. And military and power mongers and everybody. And all of this, I bet you at Bohemian Grove, 911 was discussed and set up. Nothing that happens in this world does not pass through Bohemian Grove, the Bilderbergers, and those that make the plans. So,
yeah, that year does seem like a very quiet year. It's hard to find anything on that year.
You look at 2000, 99, look at like 98, 99, 2000, 2001, and 2, and see what you see or that you can find.
I can't find much, but yeah.
And
there might be other people that have found more, but I haven't been able to find much.
And who was there in 2000 and 2001? Because July 2001, think about it, 2 months before, that would have been the hot button and who was there and what was going on. And in the Bilderberger groups during that time. But as Rockefeller said, thank you, media, for keeping us secret. So, of course, I mean, he and a few of the others own the media. They own the companies that are the media. So it's not hard for them to control it. Saying thank you is saying something to us, not to them.
Right, right.
It's saying we control, and you better know it. So what are your thoughts, then?
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like the more that we can just keep 911 in focus, the more that we can talk with people about it, I think the more people understand there's something wrong here. I really think that the general population, not only of this country, more so outside of this country, but at least just inside of this country, I do believe more people in their heart, in their mind, in their soul, in their mind, body, and soul, they know that what the government told us on 9/11 is not true. It's not true. And if it's not true, that is going to either lead them into a state of fear, into a state of depression, or into a state of where they're going to do something about it. They're going to find out what really happened here. They're going to search for truth, and that's what happened with.
But let's give them the pathway to action. And what is that? Well, obviously we don't think about it often. The one that gets action is if the letters start showing up in the congressman's mailbox that goes, excuse me. And that's what I tell people that contradict. Okay, write your congressman. Look at this, what we're showing to you. Look at it. Because if they look and really investigate, they're going to come up with questions or rebuttals that have to be dealt with. That's what we need. We need to get them engaged. A revolution doesn't start by idleness. It's by people going to look. And I'm not talking about a revolution against the government, but a revolution against untruth and the lies that we're given. Because the government has no compulsion to tell us anything about Antarctica, for example. Why is everybody going down there? There's speculation, but why did Germany send 3,000 scientists and close to maybe 1 million people even? And all the equipment and all research to Antarctica. It's fact that happened. And there's much more regarding the Earth. The Earth has an inner Earth. There is something to that. Why aren't they dealing with that? There's and the ruler of the Earth in the inner Earth. What about that? What is that? Admiral Byrd ties in that. Military. The military-industrial complex is quite aware of inner Earth and Antarctica and what's down there. Because they went down there and they had to make a pact which they call an alien pact, but that was what was done with Eisenhower. And while in 52 all those saucers appeared, what do you think? It's tied to Operation High Jump. So there's that element of the chained angels, which I think are chained in Antarctica. So all of this ties to that to some degree. And some people go, oh, come on. But you have to realize our Earth is not the reality we see. It's the reality that's real. That's what reality is. And it talks about it in the Bible. And all of these things are tied. And the Father is aware of these things. And when I was in the military, I learned more than I wanted to. And that's what started opening my eyes, like yours began. And I didn't find anybody wanted to hear me. You were the only one. And John, you know, he was military, but he just didn't want to deal with it, I think. So there are many people in the military that just do their job, shut up, keep their eyes forward, and just move. And there's a lot like that. You'll find some whistleblowers. Some are staged whistleblowers. Some are real. Some want information.
Why do you think that they're like that? Like, why do you think that some, like, that there's so many different people who know about this, but they have, you know, like a guy like John, who we know is a good person, but why wouldn't he want to address this stuff?
Well, one of the things being in the military,
I tried to reach out to him, but it just all went bad from there.
Well, the thing is, he's military, and I told John, he and I are military. He knew me, and he probably checked me out and see if I was saying what was true, and he figured it out probably pretty quickly. Yep, he was in submarines. He had a high clearance. Okay, he's legit. But he is currently in the military, so he could not bring up anything. He could not talk, cannot do, say, or anything military at all. Even with me, I was out, had high clearance, but he could not, say anything other than where he was going, if he could, and he was going to be gone. And that was it. And anybody in the military has to be held in suspect because either they're willingly or unwittingly part of a plan. And they're doing revelation now. Everybody that wants revelation is getting what they ask for. But will they want it after they get it? They think they want it. And like I say, it's better to keep that stuff quiet and under wraps. I would have been one that has been quiet. Now, the Men in Black issue that you mentioned to me to bring up, do you want me to go into that?
Oh, yeah. One? Yes, please.
Okay.
Please.
And I'm going to bring it up. And then the Men in Black issue, that the real ones, not the movie style, but they acted kind of the same. They're very stoic. They're very kind, nice. Excuse me, Mr. Woodliff. Hello, we're here from the NIS. We need to talk to you. They don't say what about or anything. They say, may we come in? And I said, yes, sir. Two young men, probably late 30s, early 40s. And they walked in and said, Mr. Woodliff, you had control of top secret knowledge. Yes, sir. You had a book. I'm not going to say what dealing with. But they said, you have this book. Wasn't turned in. Yes, sir. Here's who I turned it into today. It's pretty much that. Now, this was back in 84, and I'd only been out a little over a year. I had moved. They didn't know where I was. I didn't tell anybody I'd moved. I moved in with a friend who gave me a room free. So I had no listing, no telephone number, no address as of yet at that point, except my mom and dad's, which was up the road. And they found me. That's kind of hard to do. That takes some real knowledge. And they had it. Where they got it, I don't know. And that is something that, comes out of the book of Spy versus Spy. How do you find somebody that has no listing anywhere? You have to be there. You have to go there. And you have to press people to get information.
Or they just never lost track of you. Right.
or that they were constantly had eyes on contact.
They always had eyes on. Yeah, exactly.
And so, and they had the glasses. They looked similar, but they were not alien. Maybe they were. I don't know. I doubt it. But I saw them, and it's frightening.
So there were two of them? Three?
Yeah, two.
Two. Okay.
What
were they
hats
wearing?
and no, they just had the glasses, no hats.
So they were in black? Did they?
Yeah, dark suits.
I mean, shoes? Okay.
Black
nice
shoes.
dark suits? Okay.
Nice, very meticulously dressed, very presentable. If they were walking down the street together, you'd know them. Separately, you'd just go, huh, nicely dressed guy. They blend in.
Ties?
They blend in.
Black ties?
Nondescript. Dark,
okay.
Generally nondescript. In other words, they don't stand out. They don't, unless you look and go, oh, that's it.
What type of car?
White shirts.
What type of car did they?
Didn't see their car. That was a strange thing. I looked around and
I
didn't see a car.
So black suits, black ties, white collar shirts?
Yeah. Pretty
hats,
much.
Black hats?
No hats. I remembered no hats. They didn't have hats.
And they must have flashed a badge at some point?
Never pulled a badge out. They didn't. They just said NIS. I said, come in. I didn't ask for their badge. I didn't want to know. They knew.
So they
about
could have been.
something.
They could have been anybody.
But could have been. But I knew they were real because they knew things that not just anybody could know. They had military knowledge, and they brought up things and said this, and you can't get that just in general John Q. public. I knew they were real. I didn't have to ask for a badge. They just asked me casually.
Yeah, so they come in, they talk to you about what?
Well, they just went right to the point like they do. We have information. You had this book, Above Top Secret, and it was not turned in. Do you have that book? No, sir, I turned it in. We're going to have to vet that. Who'd you turn it into? This person here. At this date, I turned in all my data. They went back. I never heard from them again. If there was a problem, they would have come to me again and picked me up and said, let's go through your things. Let's go back to this person. Let's deal with it. So I was fortunate in that they did not come back. Thankfully. And it was scary because if they find you to be a problem, they can make you disappear, period, and kill you. They can do what they want. And they're trained to do it well. And they weren't huge, monster-looking things, no, but they're trained. And it doesn't take much for them to get you to comply in any issue if there's a resistance. They don't have any problem with that. But these seem like general investigators, and I wasn't interested in causing any problems. And are they real? Yeah. But I've had several strange incidents that are real that people would not believe, like the black-eyed girl, in San Francisco, and the event that I had hiking. And I thought, these are strange things. In the event where the guy said, oh, yeah, that's exactly what you think, unsolicited. I'm going, these things that happened to me in the Men in Black issue is something that I thought, what? I've experienced all these things. What do they mean? One is they thought I did something wrong in the military. They don't let you off the hook if you do. If you, escaped with him. And they watched me after to see if I was selling, speaking with anybody, because they had a base there. They came from Fort Hood. Those guys would have come from Fort Hood. That was the closest base. And so they would have flown in, got their detail there, and they came out. They didn't have far to go. Not far out of Killeen there. Not far even in Waco. Helicopters and military craft are always flying over here. And there are strange craft that I see that come through here occasionally. But they have stuff at Fort Hood that are subterranean. That base is subterranean. And they have some stuff that is subterranean. Anyway. and they do say that they have alien craft there. Maybe even what they say are the craft from 1947. Roswell could have gone right there. Never know. I don't know, have no confirmation of that. But they do say they have alien craft there. And this issue of 911 ties into that. It's basic, because they did say before those buildings went down, there were some strange craft that were noticed. I didn't bring that up because I didn't want to go that direction. It's not something I want to pontificate on often, but it was there. Something was there. And it could have been illustrated craft from the subterranean realm in Antarctica, because that's what Admiral Byrd dealt with. It was...
Yeah, well, as far as 911, I haven't seen any proof of anything other than, I know there were helicopters, there were planes, flying by, small Cessna planes, but I haven't really heard. The only things that I've seen about the UFOs on 911, it seemed very, very strange. So
yeah, and I
sure.
don't give it full credence. But that's the way it works. They put it in such a way as that it doesn't appear legitimate. And that's the way they want it. And that is one of the best kept secrets are not aliens, but demonic entities that want to be covered. And with 911, that was a public sacrifice. What it was for? Maybe it was to go get materials out of Iraq. Sounds weird. But there's an element of that that's in there. And I don't know what it was, but they wanted something. And I think just like in Bohemian Grove, there's a demonstration of sacrifice. But that sacrifice is tied to what happens in the United States at some level in some instances, requiring sacrifice. It's not symbolic. It's showing their sacrifice is going to be this year. What's it going to be? Now, I know you haven't heard that before, but I think that is involved in that they provide sacrifice. Children, got it, covered. Now, what about the public sacrifice, those out there? See, that's why I mentioned to you to look at 2000 and 2001, Bohemian Grove, the sacrifice of care. It's a worldwide thing, yes, but it's coming more and more to the United States. And did you notice anything? Did you notice anybody of note that you noticed that entered the Bohemian Grove in 2018?
We've got some reports based on the San Francisco Chronicle. There's a very small report on it, so I'm trying to verify that. But yes, it does look like Chris Matthews was there, and there were a few other notable people there. Let me try to pull that up here.
Because that could indicate what's going to happen with the sacrificial system. In other words, what's going to be sacrificed?
They were very anti-Trump, and there was I gotta find this article because there was someone who gave a speech about Trump, and I guess it went over very well. And there was a judge who they were calling a sellout because he. I guess something to do with Kavanaugh. I gotta find this article.
Because that is something to watch for then. What's going to happen with Trump or Kavanaugh in this case? They don't like Kavanaugh.
Yeah, basically that's basically it. It was all anti-Trump, which was not the feeling that I got standing outside. Now maybe I took it wrong. Maybe I just didn't. See that the people that were saying, that were waving hands and all this stuff, maybe they weren't really pro-Trump people, but the feeling I got from standing outside is at least the workers and some of the people that were driving by, they were all pro-Trump people.
Which says something. What does it say? That Trump is in there by design. This was not a surprise. This thing of anti-Trump, what's it for? Why do they want? They want to polarize the United States.
Right.
So they're really all for Trump. And they want Trump to do certain things to what? He was a polarizer. They thought the perfect guy to start a civil war. And because they knew certain people within the liberals and the far left are different. If you've noticed. The far left wants to destroy the country. But the liberals are kind of for the country. And I state that. But it's true. They're all American. They want to help the gays and everybody, and they want our nation to survive. The far left is the one that does the destruction. The Supreme Court, the sacrifice, I would not be surprised for polarization effect and to get a shot, get enough people behind Trump that if he's shot, what could that bring up? That might be the one. Have you seen the violence of the Trump supporters, which I'm not, and I'm not really a Trump supporter, but I voted for him as a better candidate to put in office, which is what they probably wanted to do. This is not something that is not unknown as the factor of how the public is garnered and moved by issues. They know what is at stake. They know who to put in place to garner the votes they want. It's not totally all things are rigged, but they can set it up for their own gain. So, the point is, even if they did rig it, nobody could catch it, especially now. But we have to understand, they're in control. The big three cities have had hundreds of years of experience. United States, D.C., since 1791, I think it was, since 1791. But the experience that is brought forth could be thousands of years and how to get these things done. And then you have the spiritual element that brings into it smart TVs and things, frequency modulation, all of these things, God thought, put it on a frequency and send it out. And that was where the big test came in 9/11, tying back in, is that they put, they were sending the frequencies out, that they were modulating at 8 hertz very effectively, I bet, putting thoughts in people's minds. And that's where I think some of this control comes over, where people can't get out of, is the frequency modulation of putting thoughts in people's minds that says no. Now, low frequency modulation is what the military uses all the time. And 8 to 13 hertz is what our brains think at. Do you think they can modulate that? Absolutely. We're a receiver. And it seems crazy. But however, the military physics and understanding tells you that when you think at 8 hertz, can you modulate 8 hertz? Of course you can. And put words and thoughts in people's minds. So it's not beyond the pale to do it. And I think 9/11 showed that they can control most of the people because they did it with their satellites. And very low frequency, high frequency, and I think they managed to pull off one of the greatest things, as they did, and I think they had that back in the time of Kennedy.
Yep.
So what's the tie-in? Technology. What do they want? Technology. To do what? To control. And it's bigger than just weapons. It's not how to go to war. It's how to win over the populace in the easiest, most structural fashion to get their aims in place, which is, going back again, as I kept reiterating, bringing in the New World Order. Now, Dan is a Christian, I heard?
Yes, he is.
then he understands what I'm talking about then.
Oh, yes, he does.
And he can vet very well what I am talking of.
Yes, he can.
Because I have knowledge of dark things from the military and dark things that I've learned in person. And I talked to a lady at our church that says she speaks to archangels. And she came to me to talk about it. Archangels, Gabriel, Michael.
Yeah.
And I was going, really? I investigate those types of things. We'll have to talk this next week. So it could be a deception that's involved there. And, I'm glad we had Dan here because I'm not an outgoing, flowing source of knowledge, even though I have a lot of it that the Father has given me. And one of these days I may get killed for it. Well, it is going to happen that they will kill all of those who are followers of the faith. And they don't need to find us. They know where we are. The spirits in the realm of darkness keep up with a lot of things. They don't need technology. They keep up. But now, what are your views going on to that which I just discussed, all of this? Where do you go with it, and what have you found? And in your spiritual walk, what have you picked up? And I'm sorry I scared you about walking in the woods. Come on, don't be afraid.
Oh, no. No, I was just joking with you.
I knew you were pulling my leg, but I had to make sure.
I was.
I was going,
yeah. I was.
But when it comes to children, they shouldn't go out there and walk alone by themselves.
Nobody should, really. Nobody should. I mean, even the whole...
without prayer and knowing what you're dealing with.
Yeah, and it's always good to go in pairs, because where there are two or more, correct?
I am there, and he was with me because there's times when I was walking out there at night, and I sensed things very powerful. I felt the power to the point it almost made me afraid. I thought, no, Father, I'm trusting you, even though this pressure is on me, and I sense the darkness, not just the night, but the darkness that was closing in around me. And the Father has shown me a lot of things. He hasn't shown many people black-eyed children or people. I saw a black-eyed angelic person, whatever it was. And why? Well, to show me something, that they're increasing in power. They're starting to come out. This was back probably in 2001 or 2, right at that time that I saw that. And that's about the time I had the experience in the Oakland Hills, not long before I saw the black-eyed person. And I saw things in the woods at night, and when I was there, I don't talk about it. They weren't major things, in my opinion, and I didn't worry about it. And I didn't see them clearly. I didn't see things clearly, but I sensed more than seeing most of the time. And people have to realize that you're watched all the time by dark and light. And being prepared is to read the Word daily. That's what it is. That's what protects you, the Father. And having knowledge and how to deal with them if you are confronted. And I know how to deal with that. I was given that by the Father, by His grace. Not that I'm all powerful, He is. And He can let me experience something or not. And the 911 was an experience we all had to endure. It was a spiritual experience. It was in the physical realm, but it was darkness reaching out. Think about it. Would you have thought somebody could have done that before 9/11? Would you have thought that something like those two buildings could be brought down, attacked, without anybody being able to do anything about it? You would have laughed.
No, but
if I would have told you, I know people that are going to take the trade towers down in New York City. What would you have told me before this happened and you heard and understood things as you do today? What would you have told me? They're going to bring the two towers down. They're going to be flattened, and then the World Trade Center building number 7, all of that right there in center was going to be flat.
Gone. Yeah, gone.
And you would have looked at me and went, well, you could have equivocated. Well, it's possible. It could be done if the right people were involved and everybody was working together to get it done. It could possibly be done.
Only if they were built to be that way, right? Only if they were built to be brought down. I mean, to me, that's the most logical thing. Is that they were actually built like that. So then that was one of the things where this Robert Alexander thing. It wasn't for me. It wasn't really about him. It was that he had mentioned something that was actually true, and that they were like, wait a minute, okay, we need to make sure, like it was almost like a circumstantial, coincidental thing, that it was like, we want to make sure nobody even thinks about that.
Well, to bring out truth, sometimes you throw a lie around it to cover it. But what was that he brought out about it? That it was built to be brought down? Is that your tie-in that you're telling me?
Well, okay, not with him, but when you really think about it, the only way that these towers, like, why were they even built, first of all? And when you think about world trade, what are we talking about? We're talking about stocks. We're talking about all that stuff. We're talking about trade, like global trading, right? So, but the only thing for me that makes sense is that these towers were built to be brought down. There's no way somebody would build these towers and then, 20, 30 years later, they're crumbled to dust. The whole thing from the 60s, from the 70s, and I forget exactly when they started, talking about building these buildings, but that to me is the only thing that makes sense, is that they were built to be brought down. They were built to be taken down.
Well, it would be good to get footage of it being built and look at the structure to see if engineers can look at things and go, wait a minute. That would be something to consider, because they did do a lot of filming of it being built. And it showed the naked frame being assembled. There is footage of that. I remember looking at it. And there's probably some data that you could glean from that, or at least see if there's evidence it would be there of what you're talking about. Because they were talking about the columns, a 3-column setup. That's the center core that holds that building together, that they build the frame around.
Right. And there were people. Yeah, I mean, but the problem with that, even the problem with that, is that there were people who built this building. They built this building so that if a plane did go through it, that the building would still stand. So there's even a contradiction there. So it's more and more, and now we have this whole, we have a Richard Gage versus Judy Witch, which is the buildings were taken down by bombs as opposed to the buildings were taken down by weaponized
could have been
nuclear weapons. Yeah, I don't know.
But the thing about it is, if you look at the plane as it goes into the building, there's no blow up or effect of the building of the plane's wings at all. It just blows up when it hits right at the nose before it gets there, so to speak. And I thought that got me. You look at the planes going into it, and they do show it and go, now look at this. A hologram would act that way. That would just kind of dissipate as it goes in, and I thought, no, that's odd, and good point. Because I looked at it and go, oh, well, it does do that kind of. You have to look at it. And you have to look
I have looked at it, but I've looked at both of them. So I've looked at the video where the hologram people say this is a hologram, and then I've compared that. But then I've compared that video to the actual video, to the raw video, and it looks different. So that's what bothers me about the hologram people.
Well, the thing is, the hologram is not a complete hologram. It's partial. It is not the whole thing. I think they tested it, but it wasn't everything. It wasn't a complete plain hologram, in my estimation. It might have been a shell covering a missile with holographic cover to help sell it as an airplane. So
yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, the whole thing with that is there's firefighters that say that there, at least one firefighter, and I'm going to go with his theory, is that there was a large black plane that hit one of the towers.
And that's what I go with.
That's where
myself.
I'm going to start.
Well, that's what I ended up with. But were there some holographic elements involved in it? I think so. No, it wasn't the whole plane. But it may have covered that smaller plane that was there that was covered, cloaked, as it were, somewhat with a hologram.
Yeah.
Which would make more sense if they're testing something. They wouldn't want to try to make it a full hologram because it might fail. What do? You put structure there, and then you see if you can map it and cover it well. And if it's tied into the proper satellite system, you could get that. That's my point. Not a total hologram. Because I thought hologram at first, but I thought, no, I only saw the wings kind of dissipate. So I thought, okay, they're covering something smaller within that, and they make it look like a bigger plane, which probably it wasn't. So that's something that I wanted to look at more. Because that seems to hold more than just a total holographic image. Because I didn't buy it totally.
The holographic thing just is to me just seems like a big distraction, and it's really because you would have to discount so many people that saw it. Like, you would really have to say that what the people who are on the ground, what they saw, they did not see that. And if I was on the ground and you told me that, I would think that your whole theory is just crap. So that's the biggest problem that I have with the no plane theory, just in general.
Right. Well, that's what I kind of came up with. I thought it can't be a whole hologram because of that very point. But I think there were some holographic elements in there. You don't have to build a whole plane, but I'm sure they doubted the holograph working totally, so that they put a plane there that used holograph to make it more convincing and to cover anything they didn't want seen, which it might have been a case there. I don't know. But I think hologram had some part in this. Holographic things today are far more advanced, I see. And they've done the holograph of humans that look human, but you can stick your hand through them. And AI combined with that, and you could take a robot and I think dress it in a hologram and it would look human, except you would reach out and touch it and the robot would give it substance, but it would not be real 100%. There's another thought, though I don't think they're doing that, but that has a reality to it. And the things that look so real and holographic to where it looks like you could touch it and it's real, that's a scary thing. And that's where I think they're up to, just about, with the holographic. They can make it look biologically real. And I think that's totally possible. Although it would take a lot and it would have to be watched carefully, because you can't just, and how would it open a door? It would have to take some physical component to give it its substantiation to make it believable. So robots come in and AI, and that ties it in perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
And you go,
that's right.
And you can put that, and that's why I thought, wait, it wasn't a whole plane that's a hologram. Parts of it were. But they had to cover themselves. If it was a missile, you wouldn't want it to be seen as a missile. And, Flight 93 was to reinforce the fact that they were commercial planes. When the two that hit the World Trade Center maybe were not, which was obvious due to the black plane, because no commercial plane is black. And none of them were like that, except for Flight 93. That was a real deal. So they took down the commercial flight, and it helped cover their fact that these were not commercial, that were the two World Trade Center flights that were practically missiles covered in some type of plane covering-like elements combined with a little bit of holographic effect that made it complete. And that would fit along with the witnesses, yours, and the fact that they were probably testing it during that time, and they wouldn't test it under the full capacity. They would wait and try it under a situation where it wasn't so close to the ground, probably. Like the high-flying, spraying planes that are, doing that. And I saw a plane disappear one time. Either has great cloaking, clear blue sky, kind of like a white field that was flying and just went, zip, gone. I thought, that's impossible unless it was kind of something that was there, much smaller. And why would they want to do that, make a hologram of a big airplane in the sky? And I don't know. Why are they doing that? And they're doing that to show us something. They're doing it on purpose. It's not just we catch it. They want us to note the aerosol spray and what's it doing. It's affecting people's mental state and vibrational state. Maybe the frequency is affected to where they're more effective at dispensing not pathogens so much as to take control of the mind, which is much better than a pathogen because you can guide them that way. So you could kill them, have them killed. It's kind of simple. Once you control the mind, you've got it. And that's their aim. They want to control the minds. 911 tells me they've done very well at that. And people around me that I talk to seems they've accomplished their purpose. They will believe the lie, like the CIA was putting. When we get people to believe a lie instead of the truth, even when it's right in their face, we know we've accomplished it. Therein is 911, their test of their ability to do that and to see the effects of what they had in place. Makes sense. But what do you think?
Yeah, it does. I'm just, I'm keeping close watch on certain things, and just kind of seeing where other trails lead. And but mostly it's just about going wherever God wants me to go. And if He doesn't want me to go down this road, He's going to put up roadblocks. And I
prayed about this. I say, guide my voice to speak what will meet your criteria for reality. And I don't like getting off the subject too much unless I can tie it in like I was doing with Kennedy. And I expanded it more after Dan got off because I don't want to throw it all out there to somebody I don't know that well right now. But did you see how I tied it together pretty well, in a sense? Or do you disagree?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, no. I mean, it wasn't like I agreed or I disagreed. It was just, these are the conversations that people need to have. To just say, well, let's just all talk about this stuff. And more people, do that, and they just need to just see that you can have a conversation with somebody who has a different view. And what I'm really scared is about 10, 20, 30, 40 years down, we're not going to have that. It's going to be a lot worse. What I'm seeing now is it's all anti-white. Ever since I was growing up, Brad, it was anti-white. Everything was anti-white. Always been,
and it's getting visceral now. It's getting.
But they've always tried. But for my whole life, they've always tried to play it like it's not anti-white. It's whites do this, whites do that, and it's like no.
The privileged white. It's not true.
It's not true. It's not true.
We're one of the smallest groups in the world. Think about it. Britain and the United States, as far as grouped, compared to the rest of the world of color, as they would say, which we're of color too, it's not their color. But we're a small group, but we command a lot of power. That's what they're complaining about. That's their complaint, is that we command power and do things. Why? That's something I can't explain. That came from Britain and the gift of the Father to that nation. They used to own a quarter of the world. bigger than Rome, bigger than any other nation. They have controlled and still control and have influence over, look, everywhere in the world. And what are they? White. So, in a way, they have a point. The whites of Britain, Europe, though not all white, Latin, white, synonymous, that now they call Latin the Latins are, what do they call it? I forgot what it was. The United States puts it out. They don't call them Latin. It's just a wrong description. And whites are really Caucasian, but not really Caucasian. They're British, particularly. Because the Caucasus area is Ukrainian, and then up in that area has nothing to do with being white, but they use Caucasian mountains, so we're Caucasian. What is that? But Britain, I'm 74% British. And, you know, I'm careful with dealing with the sites that are dealing with the DNA test. Because guess what? The government wants what? All your DNA data. Because then they can trace other things. You know, is there any Nephilimic stuff in there? Is there any of this? They're looking, believe me. The government is getting it. And so that's why you have all these DNA sites. It just started with Ancestry, which was basically the Mormon church, you know, and then they said, hey, we can use this to, hey, you know, this would be pretty good. And then we can get into genome alteration and learn if there's any alteration out there, and then how to alter it, and how this peaceful group came from this, and if there's any type of Nephilimic influence or any alteration that we can snip and use, which they would do that. So I went ahead and submitted, thinking even in all of that, I go, yeah, I'll do it. Pretty soon they'll probably say, well, you have to, for the police and everybody, you have to, you know, by law now donate a DNA sample, which is coming. So that is the thing. And plus, I'm going to look up that Truth Collector thing guy, and I wanted to check him out because he had something way back in 2013. I brushed across. Oh, who is this? Truth Collector. Uh-huh. And I don't know who he is. I've looked at a lot of them, and I thought, where'd he come from? And why didn't I see him?
Mm-hmm.
And
there's a lot of people. He's got a lot of good videos.
Oh, you've heard of Truth Collector, or you checked?
I just checked them out now.
Oh, okay. Are they pretty legit? Is he on board?
Yeah. It just seems like raw video, which is what I really want. You know, it's just show me the video and don't tell me what you think it is. So
I'm gonna have to look at it. Maybe we can talk about him later. You know, if we can get him involved, if he's still around, if he's not dead or something happened. You know.
Yeah, I hope not.
You know, and you know, like I said, all those other subjects that I wanted to bring up, we'll bring up in due time.
Okay.
And I want to.
All right. So let's just just kind of give me some of your final thoughts here, and we'll just kind of wrap this up here.
Okay. As Walter Bradley would say, this has been a good conversation. And my final thoughts is it's not final. We're on a continuum thought. And it's for truth, which is not based on us, but based on our Creator and His work to bring forth the truth. Not in disrespect to any, like, you know, John the Baptist told Philip, you shouldn't be with that girl. That's not your wife. You committed adultery. That's lawlessness. Got him killed. May get us killed. Who knows? But our final thoughts should realm towards one thing. That we're here to do His will, present the truth, present His truth and His salvation, that others may know, and that those who are to be redeemed will be given, as it says, to whom it is given. And we've been tasked by the Father to be the hands to give. Father, make us good givers, and to get our lives in order to give and share your truth. And that we ask in your name. Amen.
Amen.
And what about your final thoughts? What are your based on the conversations tonight? What do you?
It's kind of the same. Where my final thoughts are just, you know what? Let's just keep looking, just keep asking questions. Let's keep, talking to people. Let's make this topic where we're not just every year when 911 happens, right? Every year there's so many people that feel like, well, we can't talk about this. We can't talk about that. No, we should be talking about this. We should be talking about building 7. We should be talking about how do 2 buildings fall, 100 floors. How does 100 floors fall in 10 seconds at free fall speed after burning for 1 hour? How does the first plane that is hit, or I'm sorry, how does the first tower that is hit by a plane, how does that fall second? How does that happen? How do 2 towers that are literally 3 buildings, 1 building stacked on top of the other, that are designed for a plane to go through it? How do these buildings fall after burning for 1 hour? They fall in 10 seconds at free fall speed. And then we have a 3rd tower fall, a 47-story building fall later that same day, and it falls in 7 seconds at free fall speed. How does this happen, and how do we not figure out what really happened here? We have to. We absolutely have to. That's my final thought. We have to figure out what happened here and keep talking about it, regardless of what you think happened. Let's keep talking about it.
And that's the case. And tie it into the bigger and bigger things, as I did. I expanded it. Sometimes it was uncomfortable for people, maybe you. I was not trying to diverge from subject, but just illustrate that this does have something to do with Kennedy. This does have something to do with other things, wars in Vietnam. I didn't bring that up because I was saying, why are we as a nation going to war everywhere? It isn't because we have to go to war. It's because they need to get things, and they need to find them. Why are in Somalia? They have groups that are still in Somalia, in Africa, in Libya. And what are they doing there? Is it just a fight? No, it's not about war totally. But it's under the guise of war, they get to grab stuff. As Dan said, gold and everything. But then there are the ancient documents that can be interpreted and looked at for high technology that was there that they can't explain, but they can engineer now. So that's something to consider. And look at that. I don't believe everything ancient aliens say, but we need to do a show on them one time. And I'll pick a subject and research it and then talk about it and be concerned about what they say versus the truth.
Okay. All right.
That'll do. All right.
That'll do.
Wow. What time is it?
We've gone a long time.
Yep. We're going to go. We'll talk to you later.
All right, my friend. I'll chat with you later.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Okay, Brad. Bye.